Hello, and welcome to Brada Tales. Tonight, we're bringing you a selection of eerie stories paired with the soothing sound of rain to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before diving into the atmosphere of suspense, leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is. If these stories send chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get comfortable, let the fear gradually envelop you, and tell us what kind of stories you'd like to hear next time. Settle in, we're about to begin. The foggy road of North Carolina. The road stretched ahead like an endless ribbon of black, the faint glow of headlights barely penetrating the dense night. Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly, the steady hum of the car's engine the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and the GPS, perched precariously on the dash, had just announced rerouting. "Great," Alex muttered, glancing at the blinking screen. A single road sign zipped past, too fast to read, but there were no exits or familiar landmarks in sight. The original route had seemed straightforward enough: stick to the highway, make a couple of turns, and arrive at the small inn just before midnight. But now the GPS seemed determined to lead Alex into the middle of nowhere. The back roads of North Carolina were unfamiliar territory, surrounded by dense forests that loomed like shadowy walls on either side of the road. There wasn't another car in sight, and even the stars seemed to dim above. The isolation was oppressive, the kind that seeped into your bones and made you wish for even the briefest flash of another set of headlights. Rerouting, the GPS chirped again, its voice sharper this time. Alex glanced at the map, now displaying an unfamiliar web of intersecting lines. The new route was highlighted in blue, winding through what seemed like endless trees and hills. "This can't be right," Alex said aloud, hoping the sound of their own voice would cut through the growing unease. The thought of pulling over and recalibrating crossed their mind, but the surrounding darkness felt almost alive, pressing against the windows. Stopping didn't seem like a good idea. Forcing a shaky exhale, Alex followed the GPS's lead, turning onto a narrow, uneven road. The headlights illuminated the cracked pavement and the faint swirl of mist beginning to gather. As the car rolled forward, the mist thickened, creeping toward the windshield like ghostly fingers reaching for the car. Alex's hands tightened on the wheel. Something about this road felt wrong. The fog rolled in thicker with each passing second, swallowing the road ahead and leaving Alex feeling like they were driving through a cloud. The headlights struggled to pierce the milky haze, their beam reflecting off the fog and creating an eerie, disorienting glow. "This is ridiculous," Alex muttered, leaning forward to squint at the barely visible road. The forest, which had been a constant presence on either side, now felt closer, the dark outlines of trees blending into the swirling mist. The fog wasn't natural, not this dense, not this sudden. Alex adjusted the defogger, as if that would somehow clear the unnatural veil outside, but it made no difference. The world beyond the windshield was quickly becoming an abstract smear of gray and black. The GPS chirped faintly in the background, its soothing tone now grating on Alex's nerves. Ahead, the road curved sharply, but it was hard to tell where the bend began or ended. Alex eased off the accelerator, the tires crunching on gravel as they drifted too close to the road's edge. Pulling back to the center lane, Alex felt the first stirrings of unease twist in their gut. The silence outside the car was deafening. No chirp of crickets, no rustling leaves in the wind, just the muffled hum of the engine and the sound of Alex's own shallow breaths. It was as if the fog had swallowed every sound, wrapping the car in an eerie cocoon of stillness. Alex's knuckles whitened as they gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It's just fog," they whispered, more to themselves than anyone else. But the rational explanation felt hollow, like a poorly rehearsed lie. There was something about this fog, how it seemed alive, shifting and coiling like it had a will of its own. Up ahead, the mist parted briefly, revealing the jagged silhouette of a tree arching over the road. Its twisted branches looked like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare the car. Alex blinked, and the image dissolved back into fog. A shiver crawled up their spine, and they pressed the gas pedal a little harder, hoping to outrun the unease settling over them like the mist outside. The fog clung tighter to the car as Alex drove on, its density turning the world into a featureless void. With nothing but the rhythmic drone of the engine to fill the silence, the quiet was becoming unbearable. Alex reached for the car's radio, twisting the knob to find something, anything, that would cut through the oppressive atmosphere. At first, there was nothing but static. The crackling hiss filled the cabin, and Alex grimaced, turning the dial slowly. A faint voice emerged, broken and garbled, rising and falling as though submerged underwater. "Help, lost." The words faded back into static. Alex froze, staring at the radio. It was probably just some stray signal, distorted by the thick fog or interference from the surrounding trees. Still, their pulse quickened, the unfamiliarity of the voice making their hands tremble slightly. "Old radios always pick up weird stuff," Alex said, forcing a weak chuckle to calm their nerves. "It's nothing. Just noise." They adjusted the dial again, hoping for music or a clear station. Instead, another voice cut through the static, a low, hollow murmur. "Wrong turn, can't leave." The voice was faint, but the tone was unmistakable, desperate, almost pleading. Alex's breath caught, their fingers hesitating over the knob. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only the crackling static behind. "Nope, not doing this," Alex muttered, snapping the radio off with a sharp click. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now, charged with a strange energy that pressed against Alex's chest. They shook their head, forcing their focus back on the road. Signals just bouncing off the fog or something. Happens all the time in the mountains. But no amount of rationalizing could shake the uneasy feeling growing inside. The voices hadn't sounded like they were part of a broadcast. They'd sounded too raw, too immediate, like someone was speaking directly into the car. The fog thickened once more, and Alex's hands tightened on the wheel. With no sound to distract them, the faint hiss of the static seemed to linger in their ears, as if the radio had never truly gone silent. The fog clung to the car like a living thing, smothering the night in its oppressive grip. Alex leaned closer to the windshield, trying to make sense of the shifting gray ahead. The headlights barely cut through the mist, their weak glow distorted into hazy, uneven beams. The road felt endless now, an eternal stretch of cracked pavement with no signs, no turns, no landmarks. Just fog and shadows. Alex's grip on the wheel ached, but the tension in their body refused to ease. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared at the edge of the road, just within the reach of the headlights. It was tall and hunched, its silhouette blurred by the fog. Its pale form seemed to shimmer, an unnatural glow setting it apart from the darkness around it. "Shit!" Alex shouted, jerking the wheel instinctively to the left. The car veered sharply, tires screeching on the damp pavement as Alex fought to regain control. For a brief moment, the figure remained visible, standing utterly still as if watching. Then it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had appeared. The car skidded slightly, but Alex managed to straighten out and slow to a crawl. Heart pounding, they glanced into the rearview mirror, but the road behind was empty, just a swirling mass of fog. What the hell was that? Alex's voice trembled, their breath coming in shallow gasps. An animal, they told themselves. It had to be. Maybe a deer or some weird reflection in the fog. Nothing else made sense. But deep down, they knew it hadn't moved like an animal. It hadn't moved at all. Trying to calm their racing heart, Alex shook their head and muttered, "I'm tired. I'm seeing things." They pressed the gas pedal lightly, forcing the car forward again. The fog seemed thicker now, heavier, pressing against the car like a weight. Alex kept glancing at the edges of the road, half expecting the figure to return. It was just an animal. That's all. But the feeling in their gut whispered otherwise. The fog grew thicker, its tendrils creeping up the windows and smothering the light of the headlights. It wasn't just dense anymore, it felt alive, shifting and swirling as though it had a will of its own. Alex's knuckles were bone white as they gripped the steering wheel, the car crawling forward at a snail's pace. The faint outline of the road had vanished entirely, swallowed by the oppressive gray. Alex leaned forward, straining to see, but it was no use. The world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only the car, the fog, and the oppressive weight of silence. The tension in Alex's chest was suffocating. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn back, to do something, but where could they go? The road was gone, and the fog was everywhere. The headlights reflected back a wall of pale gray, their beams useless now. Alex flicked on the high beams, hoping for even a shred of clarity, but the light only intensified the haze, making it harder to see. Come on, Alex whispered, their voice trembling as they eased the car to an even slower crawl. The sound of the tires on the pavement seemed muffled, as if the fog had swallowed that, too. For the first time, Alex felt the distinct sensation of being cut off, isolated from the rest of the world. There was no sound, no light beyond the car, just an endless, suffocating void. Alex glanced at the dashboard. The comforting glow of the gauge is the only thing grounding them in reality. The GPS screen was blank now, its familiar map replaced with a black void, as though the car had driven off the edge of the earth. "This isn't real," Alex murmured, shaking their head as if to dispel the growing panic. "It's just fog. It's just fog." But it didn't feel like just fog. The car slowed to a near stop, Alex's foot hovering over the brake. Every muscle in their bodies screamed to keep moving, but the fog pressed in so tightly that it felt like driving into a wall. The oppressive stillness was unbearable. Each breath felt heavier, each passing second stretched into eternity. Alex's heartbeat thundered in their ears, the only sound in a world that seemed to have stopped entirely. Then, for just a moment, Alex thought they heard something outside, a faint, distant sound that wasn't the engine or the muffled hum of the car. A whisper. It was almost too soft to catch, but it was there, threading its way through the silence like a needle. Alex froze, the blood draining from their face. The fog closed in tighter, and Alex's foot moved instinctively to the brake, bringing the car to a full stop. For the first time, they truly understood they were not alone. The car idled in the middle of the road, its engine a soft hum against the crushing silence. Alex's eyes darted between the windshield and the rearview mirror, the faint, swirling fog outside offering no comfort. They had stopped only moments ago, but the sense of time was slipping away. Seconds felt like hours, and the night seemed infinite. The fog shifted unnaturally, a slow, deliberate movement that drew Alex's attention. It wasn't a random, chaotic drift of mist, it was purposeful, almost rhythmic. As they squinted through the windshield, something in the dense grayness caught their eye. A shadow. It was faint at first, barely a suggestion of form within the haze. But then it moved, and Alex's stomach dropped. The shadow wasn't part of the car, nor was it stationary like the trees they had passed earlier. It wavered, its edges bleeding into the fog, indistinct yet unmistakably there. "What the hell is that?" Alex whispered, their voice barely audible over the sound of their own pounding heart. The shadow grew clearer, or perhaps closer. It wasn't a single shape, but a cluster of movements, each one disjointed and alien. A flicker to the left, a ripple to the right, as if the fog itself was forming and unforming around some hidden thing. Alex blinked, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, but the shadows seemed to vanish the moment they focused on them. Their form was impossible to define, too vague, too unreal. For a brief second, Alex's rational mind grasped for an explanation. Maybe it was the headlights reflecting oddly off the fog. Maybe their eyes were playing tricks after staring so hard into the void. But the longer they watched, the more certain they became that these were no tricks of light. The shadows were moving with intention. Another ripple passed across the passenger side window, and Alex whipped their head to the side. Nothing. Just the same swirling mist. But the car suddenly felt too small, too exposed. "Okay, just drive," Alex muttered to themselves, their voice shaking. "It's just fog. Just drive." They moved to put the car in gear, but their hand froze midair as a darker shadow loomed ahead, barely illuminated by the dim headlights. It hovered for a moment, featureless yet menacing, before dissolving back into the mist. Alex's breath hitched. Their minds screamed to look away, to move, to do something, but all they could do was stare, waiting for the next shadow to emerge. The shadows outside the car seemed to multiply as Alex's heart hammered in their chest. Their eyes flicked back and forth, trying to track the movements within the mist, but it was as if the fog was alive, shifting and writhing with something just out of sight. Each time Alex tried to focus, the shapes would vanish, only to reappear moments later, growing closer, or perhaps simply more defined. Then, without warning, the car gave a violent lurch. The engine sputtered, its smooth hum turning into a coughing, choking noise. Alex's hand froze on the gearshift as the car jerked again. The headlights flickered once, then twice, before dimming to near darkness. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, panic creeping up their spine. They turned the key again, desperate to get the engine running, but the car only groaned in response, a series of sickening sputters echoing through the cabin. Alex's foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the engine refused to turn over. Come on, Alex whispered, their voice barely a breath as they twisted the key again. The engine groaned, a mechanical sound that felt too weak to be real, almost as if the car itself were reluctant to start. The dashboard lights flickered and died, leaving the cabin dim and cold. A sharp, high-pitched whine filled the air, making Alex's ears ring. The sound of the engine stuttering abruptly stopped, replaced by something far worse, the low, guttural murmur of whispers. At first, Alex thought it was the wind, maybe a draft slipping through the cracks, but the whispers were distinct, too distinct. The voices were soft, but they grew clearer, muttering unintelligible words just outside the car, as if a crowd was standing just beyond the fog, inches away. Alex's breath caught in their throat. "Who's there?" they called, their voice cracking, but it was swallowed by the dense silence. The whispers only grew louder, an unsettling blend of tones, too many voices at once, overlapping and indistinguishable. Some sounded like they were begging, others were more insistent, but none of them seemed to belong to anyone Alex could recognize. The fog pressed closer against the windows, as if it were trying to push inside the car itself. A faint rattling noise came from the back seat, and Alex whipped their head around, heart leaping into their throat. The interior was still, nothing out of place, but the feeling of something behind them, just out of sight, was almost unbearable. Their hand flew back to the ignition, turning the key desperately. The engine sputtered again, refusing to cooperate. "Please, please," Alex begged under their breath, their palms slick with sweat. But the car refused to start. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They could almost hear their own name faintly echoing within the blur of voices. Alex's eyes darted to the fog outside, imagining figures just behind the mist, watching, waiting. The air inside the car felt thick and suffocating, as if the atmosphere was closing in on them. "Get out," one of the whispers croaked, its voice low and rasping, like it had been dragged across gravel. Alex flinched, fear jolting through their body. This wasn't just fog anymore. This was something else. Something that wanted them trapped. "Please, leave," another voice begged, chilling and broken. With a final, desperate twist of the key, the car's engine came to life, stuttering but running. The headlights flickered back on, barely bright enough to cut through the fog, but Alex didn't wait a moment longer. They slammed the car into drive and pressed the accelerator hard, heart pounding in their chest. But as the car lurched forward, the whispers didn't fade. They followed, lingering just at the edge of hearing, like ghosts that wouldn't let go. The car jerked forward, its tires slipping slightly on the slick road, but Alex didn't care. They pressed the accelerator harder, desperately trying to escape the suffocating fog that seemed to tighten around them like a noose. Every breath felt heavier, like the air was being sucked out of the car, and the whispers, those terrible, distorted voices, kept growing louder, more desperate. Alex's heart hammered in their chest as their eyes flicked between the rearview mirror and the windshield, scanning the fog. But there was nothing except the thick gray swirling just beyond the headlights, suffocating the road ahead. The fog had become an impenetrable wall, pressing in on all sides. "Please." The whisper came again, closer this time, a faint crack just outside the window. Alex's breath caught in their throat, and their hands fumbled to lock the doors. They reached down to the central lock, pressing it down frantically, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. The sound was absurd, yet it gave them a false sense of security, locking themselves inside, as if that could keep whatever was out there at bay. But the more they scanned the fog, the more the shadows seemed to move, dark shapes drifting just beyond the reach of the headlights. Figures. Alex swallowed hard, leaning forward in the seat, eyes wide with panic. Something was moving out there. No, it's just the fog. Alex tried to tell themselves, but the whispers were growing louder now, no longer faint murmurs but clear cries, rising in volume with every passing second. The voices distorted, warping into guttural, agonized sounds. "Help, please, help." The voices sounded so real, too real. Like someone, or something, was trapped out there, calling for help. Alex's skin prickled, the hairs on the back of their necks standing up as a new wave of panic rushed through them. They scanned the road again, but there was nothing. No figures. Just swirling gray mist. But the cries kept coming. The whispers turned into distorted shouts, the voices blending into one horrific cacophony of pain and desperation. "Help me, you can't leave." Alex's hands gripped the wheel so tightly their knuckles turned white. The fog pressed closer, thickening around the car until even the edges of the headlights disappeared into the haze. Their breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, and they wiped sweat from their forehead. I'm not stopping," Alex repeated under their breath, trying to convince themselves that driving through the fog was the only thing that could keep them safe. But the whispers, the voices, seemed to be all around them now, right outside the car, impossibly close. A voice, guttural and warped, scraped against the window like nails on glass. "Turn back." Alex's heart skipped a beat, and they slammed their foot harder on the gas. The car lurched forward, the tires screeching as it sped through the fog. But no matter how fast they drove, the voices didn't stop. The cries for help became a steady, relentless chorus. And then, the road disappeared. The headlights flickered one last time, and suddenly, the fog was all-encompassing. There was no road ahead, no end to the mist. Alex could feel the car drifting aimlessly, swallowed by the fog. It was as if the very world had dissolved around them. The whispering voices had become a constant hum in their ears, a swarm of phantom cries clawing at their mind. "Don't leave." Alex slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. Their breath was shallow, panic surging through them, and they stared into the fog, searching for some sign of what was out there. But all they saw was the same endless gray, impossible to escape, impossible to understand. They were trapped. The car sat motionless, the engine still running, but the world around it had come to a complete standstill. The fog was now so thick it seemed to press in from all directions, the edges of the headlights barely cutting through the haze. Alex's heart was racing, the breath catching in his throat with each whisper that still echoed through the air. The voices had faded somewhat, but the oppressive sense of something watching, something waiting, remained. Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly, too terrified to move, too afraid to blink. Every second felt like an eternity. The air was cold now, seeping into the car, making Alex's fingers numb as they trembled. The weight of the fog was unbearable, stifling any hope of escape. And then, from the corner of their eye, they saw it. A figure. Alex's breath hitched in their throat. At first, it was barely a shape, just a dark blur at the edge of the fog. But as the seconds ticked by, the figure grew clearer, more solid, its outline forming against the backdrop of swirling mist. The figure stood completely still, motionless. It was tall, unnaturally so, its form indistinct at first. But then the fog seemed to part slightly, as though recoiling from it. The figure took shape, a tall, gaunt silhouette, dressed in dark, tattered clothing. Its features were obscured by the fog, but there was something unsettling about the way it moved, or rather, how it didn't move. It didn't sway with the breeze. It didn't shift in the mist. It just stood there, staring. But it was the eyes that caught Alex's attention. Two glowing red eyes, burning with an unnatural intensity, fixed on Alex through the fog. They glowed like smoldering embers, piercing the thick mist, and they locked onto Alex with an unnatural, predatory focus. It was as if those eyes could see through the car, could see into Alex's very soul. Alex's blood ran cold. For a moment, they couldn't move. The figure was only a few feet away, standing in the middle of the road, unmoving, watching. Alex's hands gripped the wheel harder, knuckles turning white, but they didn't dare take their eyes off the figure. A wave of cold dread washed over Alex, so intense it felt like it had invaded their bones. The car was too close, but Alex couldn't bring themselves to drive away. The figure's eyes were hypnotic, and the whispering voices, now faint and distant, seemed to die away in its presence. The world shrank down to the figure standing motionless in the fog, those burning red eyes the only thing that mattered. What do you want?" Alex whispered hoarsely, their voice shaking. But the figure didn't respond. A cold gust of wind passed through the car, causing the fog to swirl, but the figure remained where it was, unperturbed. Alex's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of movement, any other shapes lurking in the mist, but it was still just the fog and those eyes. "Please, don't come any closer," Alex muttered, barely recognizing the words that escaped their lips. But the figure didn't move, not even an inch. It simply stood there, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the figure's head tilted ever so slightly, a subtle movement, as if considering Alex, as if studying them. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Alex's chest tightened. The weight of fear crushed down on them, suffocating, drowning out all thoughts except for one: run. The engine sputtered again. It wasn't a normal engine stall this time, but something far more sinister. The car's headlights flickered as if straining to stay alive. The shadows seemed to deepen around the figure, the fog growing denser and more suffocating. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the figure's presence alone was warping the space around it. Alex's hands shook as they slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun against the pavement, struggling for traction. They could barely hear the engine now over the sound of their own panicked breathing. But as the car reversed, the figure didn't move. It stayed there, staring, its eyes glowing brighter, closer now. "No. Please," Alex pleaded, pressing the gas pedal harder, but the car's movement was slow, sluggish. It was as if the fog itself was fighting them, trying to keep them trapped. The figure seemed to loom even closer now, as if the space between them had closed in the blink of an eye. And then, just as Alex thought they might hit it, the figure vanished into the fog. One moment it was there, standing still and watching. The next, it was gone, consumed by the mist. Alex slammed the car into drive, flooring the accelerator, but the fear didn't leave. That dreadful feeling, the sense that something was still watching, lingered long after the figure had disappeared. They couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't gone, it had simply retreated into the fog, waiting for the right moment to come back. Alex's mind was a blur of frantic thoughts. The moment the figure disappeared, an eerie silence settled over the car, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the calm before a storm. The fog had become heavier, more oppressive, as if the very air was thick with something that wasn't quite natural. The whispering hadn't stopped. Why was it watching me? Alex gripped the steering wheel so hard their knuckles ached. The car was moving now, slowly but steadily, and Alex's foot was pressing the gas pedal with more force than necessary, trying to escape, to outrun whatever that thing was. But no matter how fast the wheels turned, the whispers still swirled around them, soft at first, but growing in volume again. Was it real? Was it just my mind? Alex's breath was shallow, panic bubbling just under the surface. Their heart was pounding like a drum in their chest, every beat reminding them of the red eyes, those glowing, penetrating eyes that had seen them. There was something so deeply unsettling about the way it had stood still, unmoving, just waiting. Why didn't it attack? Alex's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, but the road was still empty. No figure, no shadows lurking. Just the fog. Just the silence, but the whispers. The voices. It was almost as if the figure had never existed, but the voices were still here. It's not over. It's never over. The whispers now felt like they were crawling under Alex's skin, like they were inside their head, wrapped around their thoughts. They couldn't make out the words, not clearly. But they didn't need to. The sound of them, distorted, fragmented, was enough to send a chill crawling down Alex's spine. The car's headlights flickered again, and Alex instinctively turned them off, hoping the darkness would help, hoping it would shield them from whatever was out there. But the fog didn't care. I can't keep going like this. I need to get out. Alex's hands were shaking. Their mind was spinning with confusion and fear, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no explanation seemed to fit. Was it the stress of being alone on these isolated roads? Or had the fog truly done something to them? The voices sounded too real, the figure too terrifying to just dismiss as their imagination. But how could they explain it? What if I imagined the whole thing? Alex thought, desperately clinging to the idea. I didn't see it clearly. It could have been a trick of the light, or something in the fog playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, Alex knew that wasn't the truth. The figure's eyes, those glowing red eyes, they were real. Too real. The voice that had whispered at the edge of their hearing, that had seemed to beckon them, it felt too close, too intimate. As though it was reaching for them. No, it's not in my head. It's out there. I'm not alone. A fresh wave of fear crashed over Alex. The thought of being trapped in this thick, suffocating fog, with no way to escape, seemed almost too much to bear. The air felt cold again, even though the heater was running. The whispers were relentless now, echoing through the car like an invisible force pressing in from every side. Maybe I should stop. Maybe I should just find a place to pull over and wait. Wait until morning. The thought of stopping made Alex's stomach turn. The figure could still be out there, hiding in the mist, waiting for the right moment to strike. The voices might not just be whispers anymore. They might be something worse. The fog itself felt like a trap, a living, breathing thing that wouldn't let them go. But driving through it felt like running blindly into something even worse, something unknowable. What the hell is happening? Alex thought, their voice shaking in their mind. I just want to get out of here. I need to get out. But I don't know if I can. The fog pressed in once again, the road ahead now indistinguishable from the mist. The whispers continued to wrap around Alex's thoughts, louder and louder, as if they were trying to push their way inside. And then, from somewhere in the fog, a voice, clearer this time, spoke directly into Alex's mind. You can't leave. You're already lost. Alex froze. The blood drained from their face, and for a split second, they couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Lost? The voice echoed in their head, the words now a chilling, undeniable truth. Alex wasn't just lost on this road. They were lost in the fog. The sudden roar of the engine breaking the silence was almost a shock to Alex's system. Their fingers were still tightly gripping the steering wheel, their knuckles aching from the pressure, but the car had, miraculously, started. The engine on to life with an unexpected ease, the headlights flickering to full strength. Alex's breath caught in their throat as they released the gas, the faintest trace of hope sparking in their chest. Maybe I can still get out of here. But as the car started moving again, the fog around them seemed to grow even denser, more oppressive. The path ahead stretched out, but nothing seemed to change. The road was identical to what it had been before, nothing but swirling mist and darkness closing in on every side. It was as if the fog itself had erased all sense of distance, all sense of direction. Alex's grip on the lip tightened once again. Their eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting the glowing eyes of the figure to appear behind them, but there was nothing. Just the same endless expanse of fog. No, I can't have gone in a circle. The car hummed steadily beneath them as Alex pressed the gas, trying to push forward to force their way out of this unnatural trap. But the fog refused to relent. As they continued driving, the sense of déjà vu washed over them like a cold tide. They weren't moving forward at all, at least not in the way they thought they were. They passed the same faded road sign they had seen earlier, the one that marked the last turn. Alex's heart skipped a beat, and their eyes flicked to the left, where another identical sign stood, exactly the same as the one they had just passed. It couldn't be possible. They had already gone past that sign. They had already passed the exact same stretch of road. What is happening? Alex slammed their foot on the brake, and the car jolted to a stop. The fog settled around them, heavier now, almost suffocating. The eerie silence was broken only by the faint hum of the engine and the soft whispering that had not stopped. The voices were distant again, but still there, still watching. They looked in the rearview mirror again. This is impossible. The road behind them was just as obscured as the one ahead, lost in the swirling gray mist. But that wasn't the unsettling part. The unsettling part was that the road behind them looked exactly like the road ahead. The same faded lines, the same bends in the asphalt, the same nothingness that stretched endlessly in both directions. Alex's pulse quickened. They pressed the gas again, their mind racing for an explanation. The fog was too thick, too unnatural, and no matter how far they drove, they seemed to be stuck in the same loop. This is a nightmare. This can't be real. The thought hit Alex with a wave of cold dread. They had been driving for what felt like hours. Had it been hours? But the scenery hadn't changed at all. The road remained the same. The fog remained the same. The sense of being trapped in an endless loop was overwhelming, gnawing at the edges of Alex's sanity. They slammed the wheel in frustration. What the hell is going on? Alex muttered, their voice hoarse and frantic. Their breath was coming in shallow bursts as their eyes darted between the road and the mirrors. Every instinct in their bodies screamed to stop, to turn back, to get out of the car and run, but something held them there. Something deeper than fear, something primal, like a voice in their mind urging them to keep driving, keep moving forward. If I stop, I'll never get out. I'll never get out. The words repeated in Alex's mind, as if some invisible force was whispering them over and over. The thought terrified them even more. The idea that stopping, even for a moment, would be the end of them. They pressed down on the gas pedal again, the car jolting forward, the tires spinning on the slick asphalt. But nothing changed. The road stretched on, the fog closed in, and the oppressive feeling of being watched only deepened. Alex's stomach churned as the road seemed to stretch on forever. The hours, or what felt like hours, blurred together. They weren't getting anywhere. And then, as Alex's panic grew, the first flicker of movement appeared in the fog. Just a shadow at first, barely noticeable in the periphery. Alex blinked and then saw it. A figure, not the same one, but a shape, tall and looming, moving just beyond the fog. It didn't have the glowing red eyes. It wasn't alive, not in the way that anything real should be. It moved, yes, but with an eerie grace, sliding through the mist like a shadow detached from the world. Alex's breath caught in her throat. Is it following me? The figure didn't get any closer, but its presence was undeniable. Its dark form swayed, as though it were watching, moving in unison with the car. No matter how fast Alex drove, the figure seemed to keep the same distance, always just on the edge of the fog. Always watching. I have to get away. I have to. But every turn, every press of the gas pedal, Every attempt to break free only brought Alex back to the same stretch of road. The loop seemed endless. The figure remained. The fog pressed in, suffocating, and the whispers were louder than ever. Alex wasn't just driving anymore. They were running. Running from something they couldn't see, couldn't escape. But in this fog, in this endless loop, there was nowhere to hide. The figure was still there. That unnerving shadow, now with its unmistakable glowing red eyes, had appeared again, this time more clearly, more ominously. Alex's heart slammed against their ribcage as they glanced back at the rearview mirror, half expecting the worst. There it was, barely visible at first, just a flicker of movement in the fog. But then, as the car picked up speed, the figure became clearer. Those red eyes, glowing like burning coals in the night, stared back at Alex through the mirror. "It's following me. It's following me." Alex's foot slammed on the accelerator without thinking. The engine roared to life, and the car shot forward, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. But no matter how fast they drove, no matter how much distance they thought they gained, the figure remained right there, always in their reflection, always just behind them. "I'm not losing it. I can't be." Alex's breaths were shallow and quick, their chest tight with fear. They checked the mirror again, desperation rising in their throat. The figure was still there. The eyes were burning brighter now, as if the thing was drawing closer with every mile. "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." Alex repeated the words like a mantra, hoping for a rational explanation. But nothing about this felt rational. The fog, the whispers, the figure with the red eyes. None of it made sense. It all felt like an impossible nightmare, one they couldn't wake up from. The fog outside had become even thicker, pressing in against the windows as if trying to suffocate them. The road ahead was nearly invisible now, swallowed by the mist, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was undeniable. "I can't breathe." The thought came to Alex in a rush, their pulse pounding in their ears. The fog wasn't just blurring the world around them. It was closing in. With every moment, it felt like the walls of the mist were getting tighter, narrowing, shrinking their space, trapping them in a cage of their own fear. "Come on, just a little more. Just a little faster." They pressed harder on the gas pedal, the engine screaming in protest, but still, the figure followed. Those eyes. Those red eyes. The closer Alex drove, the closer it seemed to get, but no matter how fast they accelerated, it was always in the rearview mirror, always just out of reach. Alex's mind raced with frantic thoughts. Maybe if they could make it to the next town, or the next exit, if there was one, maybe they could lose it. Or maybe they would just keep driving in this endless circle. There's no town here. No exit. No way out. The realization hit Alex like a cold wave. The figure wasn't just following. It was leading them, guiding them deeper into the fog, deeper into whatever nightmare this place had become. The road wasn't looping anymore. The fog was pulling them towards something they couldn't see, but could feel pressing in from all sides. "I don't want to see it. I don't want to know what's at the end of this road." The car's headlights cut through the mist, but they illuminated nothing but gray shadows and swirling darkness. The road stretched out endlessly before them, like a tunnel with no exit. And in the rearview mirror, those red eyes burned brighter, impossibly so, until Alex could hardly look at them. They could almost feel the heat from them, like a flame licking at their skin. No, I can't let it get closer. I can't. Alex's panic was palpable now, their minds spiraling. Every instinct told them to stop, to find some way to pull over and hide, but they couldn't. If they stopped now, the figure would catch them. If they slowed, even for a second, it would be over. I'm not going to die out here. I'm not going to let it happen. But the more Alex sped forward, the more the figure seemed to close the distance. The fog distorted their sense of time, their sense of space. Was it even real, this road they were on? Were they moving in any direction at all? The whispers had grown louder, too. No longer just faint murmurs, now they were a chorus of voices, distorted, fragmented, but unmistakably real. Each whisper seemed to be a part of the pursuit, urging Alex to give in, to stop, to let. The fog had become a living thing. It pressed against the windows with an unnatural weight, as if the mist itself were pushing, trying to invade the car, trying to break through the thin veil of metal and glass. Alex's breath fogged up the windshield, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how alive it felt, how it pressed closer, like 100 hands reaching out, as though the fog were trying to suffocate them. Alex's heart raced. They wiped the fog from the windows, but the mist immediately started creeping back in, obscuring their vision. They slammed the wipers on full speed, but the haze didn't clear, it only thickened, swirling with a malevolent intent. Every movement of the fog felt like a deliberate action, like something unseen was trying to trap them, to pull them under. I can't see. I can't breathe. Alex's chest tightened. The car's interior felt smaller, the air growing heavy with the oppressive presence of the fog. The whispers outside were louder now, more distinct, as though they were moving just outside the car, growing nearer, growing more insistent. They sounded like fragmented words, a jumble of voices, but there was no one there. No one there. No one there. No one. The thought repeated in Alex's mind, but it brought no comfort. There was something out there, something in the fog, and the tapping sound that echoed on the windows was proof of that. At first, it was faint, just a gentle tap, like the wind or a twig brushing against the glass. But as Alex's eyes darted from one window to the next, trying to make sense of the chaos outside, the tapping grew louder, sharper. It wasn't the sound of wind. It wasn't the sound of branches or rain. It was deliberate. Tap. 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 Alex's breath caught in their throat as they turned their head to the side, staring at the window. There was no one outside. Not a soul. No shadow, no movement, nothing, just the dense fog swirling like a ghostly blanket. Yet the tapping continued, rhythmic, insistent, like someone, or something, was trying to get their attention. Tap. 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 The hairs on the back of Alex's neck stood up. They couldn't breathe. The sound was coming from all around them now, each window, each side of the car, the fog pressing in so close that the glass was becoming a prison. They could almost feel it, something outside, just out of sight, watching, waiting. There's no one out there. There's nothing. But it didn't stop. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was out there was desperate to get in. Tap. 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 Alex's fingers trembled as they gripped the wheel, their pulse pounding in their ears. They checked the rearview mirror again, but the figure with the glowing red eyes was still there. It was closer now, creeping up behind them, its shape more defined in the fog. The eyes burned through the mist like twin flames, bright and unblinking, as if it could feel their terror. The tapping reached a frantic pace, as if it were trying to break through the windows. The sound vibrated through the car, filling Alex's mind with panic. Every tap echoed like a countdown, like time itself was slipping away, each moment bringing them closer to the thing outside, to whatever was waiting in the fog. Please, please just stop. But the fog didn't stop. It pressed against the car with more force now, the tapping turning into a rhythmic pounding, as if something was scratching at the windows, trying to claw its way inside. Alex could feel the vibration in their bones. Then, a sudden jolt. The tapping stopped abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. For a moment, there was only silence. The fog pressed in closer than ever, the car feeling more and more like a tiny island in the midst of an endless storm. Alex's breath was ragged now, but the stillness of the moment was almost worse than the noise had been. What just happened? They couldn't look away from the windows. The silence was unbearable. The tapping had stopped, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was even stronger now. The whispers were louder, too, almost inside the car now, reverberating off the walls of the vehicle. It's here. Whatever it is, it's here. Alex's hand shot to the door handle, and they pulled at it, trying to force it open in a panic, desperate to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked, just like the rest of the car. The sense of being trapped in this suffocating cocoon of fog and terror grew unbearable. The tapping started again, this time more frantic, the sound moving around the car like an invisible predator circling its prey. Tap. 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 And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fog seemed to pull back for a moment, just enough for Alex to see the outline of the road again, the shadows in the distance. But that didn't bring relief. It only brought more terror. The shape outside the car had shifted. It was closer now, closer than Alex had ever thought possible. Those glowing red eyes were now almost directly in front of them, hovering in the mist. And they weren't alone anymore. Another figure appeared, then another, surrounding the car. More eyes, more shapes, closing in from all directions, the tapping now a full-blown chorus of claws, scraping at the glass. Alex couldn't breathe. The figures in the fog were moving. And they were getting closer. Alex's mind was spiraling, struggling to process what was happening. The figures in the fog were not just shapes anymore, they were alive. At first, it was just a hint, a flicker at the edges of the mist, the faintest suggestion of something moving just outside the headlights. But now, the shadows were more distinct. Hands. Faces. Dozens of them, some grasping at the air, others pressing against the glass as if begging to be let inside. Their faces, twisted, distorted, were contorted in expressions of agony. Their eyes, dark and hollow, stared into Alex's soul. Alex's heart raced. No. No, this can't be real. The car lurched as they swerved to the left, narrowly avoiding the road's edge where the fog seemed to swell like a living creature, stretching to reach them. The features of the faces were like nothing Alex had ever seen, eyes too wide, mouths twisted into silent screams, skin warped and pale, melting into the thick mist. Each one felt like it was reaching for them, as if it was desperate to drag Alex into the fog with it. I had to keep my eyes on the road. But that was becoming impossible. Every time Alex glanced away, a face would appear in the fog, a grotesque visage, staring with an intensity that made their blood run cold. They could see hands now, pale, long fingers, clawing at the air as if trying to pull themselves out of the mist, reaching for the car with unnatural speed. Focus, focus, focus. Alex forced their eyes back to the road, hands gripping the wheel with white-knuckle desperation. The fog had closed in even more tightly now. The road was nearly invisible, just a gray blur stretching out endlessly, surrounded by shapes that seemed to shift and writhe. The edges of the headlights illuminated twisted shadows, but nothing clear, nothing solid. But the hands kept coming. Please, don't let them get any closer. Alex's mind raced, trying to come up with some rational explanation, but there was none. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't some trick of the light. These things, whatever they were real. The fog was alive. The figures were alive. And they were all reaching for Alex, their distorted faces contorted in expressions that twisted the very air around them. The whispers had merged into a low, guttural hum, vibrating through the car's metal frame. It felt like the very air was pressing in on them. Alex slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet road as they fought to regain control of the car. The fog was suffocating them, closing in from all sides. The road no longer felt like it was leading anywhere, just an endless loop, a maze of gray and shadow. The faces, the hands, they were getting closer. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Alex's breath echoed in their ears, and the hum of the engine was the only sound in the car. The headlights barely pierced the mist anymore, and the road had become indistinguishable from the surrounding fog. How long have I been driving? Time felt distorted. Alex's mind was struggling to hold onto a shred of reality. How could this be happening? Why was the fog alive? And why were these things coming for them? A faint tapping began again, softer this time, like fingernails gently brushing against glass. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't coming from the windows anymore. It was coming from inside the car. Alex's heart skipped a beat as their eyes shot to the rearview mirror. The red eyes were there, closer than before, glowing brighter. But there was something else now, something much worse. A face, pressed against the glass of the back window, grinning. It was a twisted face, the skin stretched too tight, the eyes too wide. It was as if the fog had molded itself into something human but not right. The lips twisted in a grotesque mockery of a smile, the teeth sharp and jagged, their edges gleaming with an unnatural sheen. The eyes locked with Alex's, filled with an empty hunger that made their blood run cold. The face didn't move, but the grinning mouth did. It opened wider, impossibly wide, as if trying to devour the space between them. No! Alex gasped and slammed their foot on the accelerator again, the car screeching forward, engine roaring in protest. The figure vanished in the mirror, but Alex didn't dare look back. The road stretched before them like an endless river of fog, but now the shadows in the mist weren't just figures, they were shapes, shifting, twitching, like they were alive, like they were following. Hands pressed against the car windows, faces twisted into grotesque masks, their mouths moving in silent screams. The tapping was back again, this time louder, frantic, as if the fog itself was desperate to break through. Alex fought to maintain control, heart hammering in their chest. This isn't real. It can't be real. It's just the fog, just the fog. But the eyes, the faces, the hands. Alex could feel the air in the car growing colder, the fog pressing closer, as if the car were no longer a place of safety. As if the road had become a path to nowhere, a path towards something waiting. Something hungry. The car jolted to a sudden stop, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt as Alex slammed on the brakes. Their heart pounded in their chest, nearly suffocating them as the figure ahead of them grew larger in the headlights. It's blocking the road. Alex's eyes were wide with panic as they tried to process what was happening. The fog had thickened again, swirling around the figure, but it wasn't enough to hide the thing that stood directly in their path. A tall, hulking silhouette, almost human in shape, but not quite. Its proportions were wrong, as if the darkness itself had taken form and twisted it into something unnatural. The red eyes, those infernal red eyes, burned through the mist, glaring at Alex. They weren't the same faint, distant glow as before. Now, they were bright, blazing like twin beacons, drawing Alex's gaze as if they were hypnotic, beckoning them closer. Alex's hands tightened on the wheel, nails digging into the leather, but they couldn't move. The figure stood perfectly still, right in front of the car, unmoving, as if daring them to try and pass. There was no escape, not this time. Not from this thing. It's here. It's real. It's going to kill me. The engine sputtered as Alex tried to restart the car. It stuttered, hiccuping, but refused to come back to life. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then went dim. The mist continued to swirl, but the figure remained unyielding, towering in the road. Its form was shrouded in the fog, but there was something undeniably menacing about the way it loomed. The air around it felt wrong, too heavy, too thick to breathe, and the very space around the figure seemed to warp, as if the world itself was afraid of it. Why won't the car start? Why won't the fog let me move? The whispering had stopped, but there was something more terrifying now, a deep, guttural growl vibrating through the air like a distant rumble of thunder, only it was much closer, much more alive. The sound emanated from the figure, as if it was breathing, inhale, exhale, slow and steady, rhythmic, like a predator savoring its prey. Alex's mind raced. Should I confront it? Should I stay inside? Every instinct screamed at them to stay inside, to lock the doors, to not move. But there was another part of them, the part that was desperate, the part that needed answers, that needed to escape this endless nightmare. The car's interior felt colder now. The air was thick with dread, making Alex's chest feel tight, like they were being suffocated by the fog itself. The figure's eyes never left them, its stare searing through the windshield, demanding attention, demanding Alex's fear. No. I can't just sit here. I can't let it get closer. But how could they confront something that felt so otherworldly? So unnatural? Alex's hands trembled on the wheel as they glanced out the window, unable to take their eyes off the figure. The road was now entirely blocked. The fog had grown too dense to see beyond the hulking silhouette. It had become a wall of terror, and Alex was trapped within it. A moment passed, then another. The figure still didn't move. It stood there, watching, waiting. The faint tapping returned, but now it was coming from all sides, like fingers lightly drumming against the metal, pressing against the windows, testing the glass. I have to decide. It was too much to bear. The figure, those eyes, were hypnotizing, pulling them in. Everything inside Alex screamed to stay in the car, to lock themselves away from the horror outside. But a small voice inside them, fearful, terrified, was telling them they needed to act. Should I open the door? Should I get out? For a moment, Alex just stared at the figure. The growl became louder, more distinct, more threatening. It was closer now, the air thick with its presence, almost tangible, as if it was reaching into the car, pulling at the space around them. If I stay in here, it will get me. But if I go out there? Alex's breath came in short bursts, the pressure inside the car unbearable. The figure was too close now. It was no longer just a shape in the fog. It was real. The way the eyes glowed, the way the figure loomed, towering and unyielding in the road, it was no longer just a hallucination. It was a force, something ancient, something primal. Suddenly, the fog around the figure began to shift. Slowly, deliberately. The hands that had once reached at the windows now appeared in the mist, pale and elongated, their fingers brushing against the car, scraping across the metal. The growl deepened, becoming a low rumble that seemed to reverberate through Alex's bones. It's coming closer. Alex's heart skipped a beat. There was no way out. No way forward. They had to make a choice. The door. Open the door. Before they could think, Alex threw the door open, the cold night air rushing inside, cutting into their skin like 1,000 tiny daggers. The moment the door creaked, the figure's eyes flared brighter, and Alex felt an overwhelming pressure build around them. Without thinking, Alex bolted out of the car, running into the thick fog, desperately trying to escape the thing that had been following them for miles. The growl turned into a growl of approval, a hunger deep in the fog, and the red eyes followed them, unfazed by their sudden flight. But there was no escape from the fog. And there was no escape from the eyes that would follow them. The air outside the car was thick with cold, damp mist, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like you were inhaling water. Alex's heart was hammering in their chest, the sound of their pulse pounding in their ears. The fog closed in, wrapping itself tighter around them, like a vice. They didn't know why they did it. Maybe it was the desperation, or the fear, or the need to do something. Alex grabbed the tire iron from the back seat of the car, the cold metal feeling strangely reassuring in their hand. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something to put between them and the thing that had been stalking them for so long. Stay calm. Don't let it see you panic. Alex stepped out onto the gravel, the sound of their boots crunching underfoot the only thing breaking the suffocating silence. The moment they cleared the car, they could feel the presence of the figure in the fog, could feel its eyes on them. They weren't just being watched, they were being hunted. The figure hadn't moved since they opened the door. It stood motionless, still as stone, yet its aura of dread permeated the air around it. The red eyes glowed brighter now, flickering in the dense mist like burning embers in the darkness. Those eyes, the eyes, were locked on Alex, unblinking, unrelenting. Alex tried to steady their breath, gripping the tire iron with both hands, but their legs were shaking. The cold fog seeped into their bones, and the growl, low, rumbling, was a constant presence at the edge of their consciousness, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It's not just a person. It's something else. Something worse. They could hear the faint sound of footsteps now, slow, deliberate. It wasn't the figure moving, it was the fog itself, creeping closer, pressing in around them. The shadows in the mist stretched, twisting unnaturally, like they were reaching out, pulling towards Alex. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, the red eyes burning through the fog. It was waiting for something. Alex's heart pounded harder. Their body felt like it was made of stone, locked in place. The tire iron was heavy in their hands, but it offered no comfort. Nothing could protect them from what was out there. What do I do? What do I do now? The growl echoed louder, vibrating the very air. Alex felt it in their chest, deep in their bones. It wasn't just an animalistic noise, it was a warning. A threat. The figure was no longer just a shape in the fog. It was a force, something ancient, something that defied all logic, all reason. Something that shouldn't exist. Alex swallowed hard, forcing their voice to stay steady. What do you want? They called out into the thickening mist, the words sounding absurd as soon as they left their mouth. What could it possibly want from me? The figure remained still, its red eyes unwavering, staring into Alex's very soul. The growl deepened, like a low rumble of thunder, and for a moment, Alex thought they could feel the fog itself pushing back against them, closing in, ready to swallow them whole. The whispers were back, faint at first, but growing louder. They weren't just whispers now. They were voices, too many to count, overlapping, murmuring in languages Alex couldn't understand. The voices were twisted, distorted, like screams filtered through layers of static and despair. They felt wrong, like they weren't just in the air. They were in Alex's mind, crawling under their skin, taunting them with things they couldn't comprehend. No. Don't let it get inside your head. The figure's eyes flared brighter. Alex's pulse quickened. Why are you here? Alex's voice cracked as they took a cautious step forward, gripping the tire iron tighter. The figure still didn't move. Its gaze never wavered. Then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from Alex's lungs, the figure tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, as if considering them. The motion was almost human, but so wrong, so unnatural that Alex's stomach churned. The creature's lips parted, just slightly, and a low, rasping breath escaped, no words, just a sound that resonated through the fog like the howl of some distant beast. Alex's hands clenched tighter around the tire iron, but they were trembling now. Their mind was screaming at them to run, to get back in the car, to leave the fog, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But their feet were frozen to the ground, as if the fog itself had wrapped tendrils around their legs, keeping them rooted in place. I can't stay here. I can't leave either. The growl turned into a guttural laugh, one that sounded as though it came from the depths of the earth itself, low and drawn out, filled with malice. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, a sound that could tear the fabric of reality apart. Alex's breath hitched. The figure hadn't moved a muscle. Yet its presence had expanded, filled the air with something vile, suffocating. The red eyes glowed brighter still, burning with an intensity that threatened to blind them. It's here for me. A surge of adrenaline flooded Alex's system, and they forced their legs to move, taking another step forward, their voice trembling as they called out one final time, "What do you want from me?" The figure's lips parted again, wider this time, and the growl deepened into something darker, something more intelligent. It was responding to them, communicating somehow, but Alex didn't understand. They couldn't understand. The figure raised its hand, and Alex's blood ran cold as its long fingers slowly pointed toward them. The air around Alex thickened, and for the first time, they could feel it, the weight of the fog, the weight of the eyes, pressing down on them. They couldn't move. They couldn't breathe. Then, the figure took a step forward. It was finally moving, and it was coming for them. Alex's heart raced in their chest as they took another step forward, the tire iron still clutched tightly in their hands. The figure's form remained motionless, its glowing red eyes unblinking, unwavering. But as they moved closer, something began to shift in the air. A strange ripple seemed to pass through the fog, like a sudden disturbance, a shift in the fabric of reality itself. And then, with a sudden, horrifying clarity, Alex realized the figure wasn't standing alone anymore. The fog thickened around them, swirling and twisting in ways that made no sense. The movement of the mist was unnatural, as though it had a life of its own, and Alex could see shadows flitting between the trees, stretching unnervingly long before disappearing again into the haze. Then the figure that had once been standing still began to change. It split. At first, it was subtle, two blurry shapes emerging from the fog at the edges of the original figure. Then, the shadows around them began to solidify, forming distinct shapes, all with the same glowing red eyes, staring at Alex, unblinking and insistent. Alex froze. Their breath caught in their throat, a cold shiver running down their spine. It wasn't just one of them. There were more. From the fog emerged 3 figures, then 5, then 10, each one nearly identical, each with the same unholy red eyes that burned through the mist like hellish embers. They moved slowly, purposefully, encircling Alex with no sound other than the faintest shuffle of feet on gravel. But even in the silence, they could feel their presence, feel their eyes, as if the very air was thick with malice, suffocating them from all sides. Alex's grip tightened on the tire iron. Their minds screamed at them to turn and run, to flee from this nightmare, but their legs were frozen in place, the weight of the fog and the pressure of the ice bearing down on them, keeping them trapped in the center of the circle. This isn't real. This can't be real. I'm dreaming. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But no matter how much Alex tried to rationalize the nightmare away, the figures just kept coming. They moved with a chilling calmness, each one identical but somehow more wrong than the last. They didn't walk like humans. No, their movements were unnatural, jerky, as if they were being pulled by invisible strings, their limbs stretching and contracting in ways that defied nature. The fog made it hard to see, but there was something disturbingly familiar in their faces, something that made Alex's stomach churn. The voices from the fog grew louder. They weren't whispers anymore, they were full-fledged cries, wailing out in distorted, garbled words. Some of them were familiar, some sounded like echoes of past conversations, muffled through layers of static. There was pain in them, anguish, the kind of sound that scraped against the edges of Alex's mind, gnawing at their sanity. What do they want? Why are they doing this? The figures began to close in, their red eyes glowing brighter as they circled Alex, their hands raised, fingers crooked and twitching like they were about to strike. Every step they took seemed to increase the pressure in the air, like gravity itself was becoming heavier. A sickeningly familiar sensation crawled up Alex's spine, a presence, something close, something just behind them. They dared not turn around, but Alex could feel the figures closing in from behind. The ground beneath their feet felt like it was shifting, moving, the earth itself warping as if it too had become part of the fog. Every direction was an endless loop, trapping them in a world where there was no escape. The figures weren't just following them, they were hurting them, controlling the space around them. No, this isn't real. They can't trap me. I have to get out. Alex glanced quickly from one figure to the next, desperately trying to find an opening, a path to freedom, but they were everywhere. They moved in perfect sync, circling them with an unholy precision that left no room for escape. And then, one of the figures, its red eyes gleaming brighter than the others, took a step forward. Slowly, deliberately, it raised its arm, fingers extended toward Alex. Its hand stretched out, impossibly long, and the very air around it seemed to warp as it moved. Alex's breath caught in their throat. It's going to touch me. Fear clawed at their insides. The figures closed in further, their breaths shallow but audible. The one with the outstretched hand was so close now, so close Alex could feel its presence, feel the pulse of its unnatural energy pressing in on them. What do they want? The figure's hand hovered just inches from Alex's chest. Their instincts screamed to move, to do anything, to run, but they couldn't, wouldn't. The words from the figures were growing louder now, distorted as they jumbled together. It was like they were trying to say something important, but all Alex could hear was static, garbled cries that didn't make sense. The figure with the red eyes leaned closer, its breath a rasp that echoed in the fog. Its mouth opened, revealing sharp teeth that seemed far too large for its human-like form, and Alex's stomach turned with nausea. It spoke, but the words were too distorted, too incomprehensible. The noise was not in any language Alex knew. It wasn't human. The hand finally moved. It was a simple motion, one that sent a wave of cold dread washing over Alex. The hand pressed lightly against their chest, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to stop. For a split second, everything went still. The fog, the figures, the distorted whispers, all of it disappeared. Then, the pressure on Alex's chest intensified, and they gasped as if someone had just shoved them backward. The world around them twisted, the fog turning into something dark and thick, like oil that was suffocating them, pulling them into its depths. And the red eyes, all of them, blinked in unison. Alex felt the cold hand press harder, and for the first time, they realized there was no escape. Alex's chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of 1,000 unseen hands, each breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The figure's hand pressed harder against their chest, cold and unyielding, as the red eyes burned through the fog. The world around them warped and swirled, the ground beneath their feet feeling less solid with every passing second. The whispers were back, louder now, more distinct, as though they were speaking directly into Alex's mind. The words were distorted, jumbled, a cacophony of voices, all layered over each other. At first, Alex couldn't make sense of it, but then, there were phrases, clear enough to pierce through the fog of terror. You let us die. You knew what you were doing. You're the reason we're trapped here. The voices didn't just come from the figures, they were inside Alex's head. Whispering, accusing, blaming. Their words didn't feel like threats. They felt like a truth Alex had been running from, ignoring for years. The weight of the words settled like stones in their stomach. Alex staggered backward, their eyes scanning the circle of figures, each one staring at them with that same, hateful, unblinking gaze. The fog thickened, the air growing colder with each passing second, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. You thought it was all over, didn't you? The voice came from just behind Alex, and they turned, only to be faced with another figure, its red eyes burning like fire. You thought you could forget, but we never forgot. The words were cutting now, sharp as knives, each one a reminder of the past Alex had tried so desperately to bury. They didn't want to remember. They didn't want to face it. Not again. But the figure spoke again, this time with a voice that seemed all too familiar. It sounded like a person Alex had known once, someone they had hurt, someone they had wronged. You abandoned us. Alex's mind reeled, memories flashing in a disjointed frenzy, too fast for them to grasp. The flashes were like broken pieces of a puzzle, pieces that had been hidden away for so long, buried beneath layers of guilt and shame. Faces. Words. Moments they had tried to forget. There it was, that memory. The one they'd hoped would stay locked away forever. It was years ago. A road trip. A fight. A mistake. The argument with a friend. No, not just a friend, but someone Alex had promised to always be there for. Someone who had trusted them. But Alex had let them down. Had abandoned them in a moment of weakness, just when they needed help the most. The figure before them smiled, cruel and knowing, its eyes filled with an understanding that cut deeper than anything physical. You couldn't even save your own. Alex's chest tightened. The air was growing suffocating, pressing in from all sides. The figures, no, the entities, were closing in, their whispers now overlapping, drowning Alex's thoughts, pulling them further into the pit of their guilt. "That's why we're here." Another voice broke through the chaos, smooth and cold, like ice on a winter morning. "Because of you." The fog pressed harder against them, thick as smoke, heavy as tar. The whispers bled together into a single voice, sharp and haunting, cutting through Alex's thoughts like a blade. Everything they had tried to forget, everything they had pushed deep inside their soul, was resurfacing, raw and painful, like an open wound. "You killed them," the voice spat, its tone venomous. "You left them to die. You were too late." Alex staggered back, their vision blurring. No. This can't be real. I didn't do that. I didn't let them die." But the memory kept flooding back, one moment after another. The phone call they ignored, the nights spent away from home, the silence they'd left behind when they had been needed most. The fog thickened, the whispers becoming an overwhelming roar, as if the entities were feeding off Alex's guilt, pulling it out of them, making it real. Alex's mind screamed to stop it, to shut it out, but the voices were relentless. They had nowhere to run. "You can't escape us, Alex," a new voice purred, and Alex felt a cold hand brush their shoulder, sending a shock of terror through their spine. "You know what you did. We're never going away." The figure's form shimmered, dissolving into the mist before reappearing, its red eyes still burning with an unforgiving intensity. The whispers turned to taunts, then to screams. "We will follow you. Forever." The entities began to move in unison, closing the circle tighter around Alex. Their faces, no, their souls, were distorted, twisting with anger, betrayal, and despair. Every whisper was a lash against Alex's psyche. Every accusation a wound deeper than the last. "You're just like us now," one of the figures whispered, its voice soft but filled with venom. "Lost. Trapped. Forever. No redemption. No escape." Alex's chest tightened, the weight of the guilt pressing down on them like an avalanche, suffocating them. They wanted to scream, to run, to fight back, but the words kept coming, each one worse than the last. The faces of the figures flickered, becoming familiar faces now, faces from Alex's past, each one contorted in pain, each one staring at them with accusations, their eyes burning with the same red fury. And then, like a punch to the gut, the truth hit Alex like a tidal wave. They weren't just haunting Alex, they were the spirits of those they had wronged, the ones they had failed. The ones they couldn't save. "Do you remember us?" a voice rasped, cold as death. "We remember you." Alex could barely breathe now, could hardly move as the fog pressed tighter, as the figures circled closer, their red eyes searing through their thoughts, leaving nothing but guilt in their wake. The entities were closing in. And with one final, terrifying whisper, Alex heard them say, "Your fate is sealed." Alex's hand shook as they raised the tire iron, their knuckles white with the grip. Fear, adrenaline, and a surge of desperate determination collided in a single moment. They couldn't let these things, these entities, win. They couldn't let them drag them into this nightmare forever. With a shout, Alex swung the tire iron toward the nearest figure. The sound of metal slicing through the fog echoed in the silence, a sharp, panicked cry. They had to fight. They had to strike. But when the tire iron made contact, it didn't connect with flesh, bone, or even resistance. It passed right through the figure, as though it wasn't even there. The metal clanged against empty air, its weight and force dissipating as if the figure had turned to smoke. Alex staggered back in shock, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The figure stood still, unfazed, its red eyes fixed on Alex with an unrelenting, silent stare. It wasn't real. The realization hit Alex like a physical blow. The figure wasn't solid, wasn't corporeal. It was a projection, a manifestation. None of them were real. This place, this fog, these entities, they weren't made of flesh and bone. They were part of the fog itself, intangible, existing in a realm beyond the physical. But the terror still felt real. The pressure, the suffocating weight of guilt, the horrible presence of these things, they were real as the air Alex was struggling to breathe. A wave of dizziness swept over Alex. The fog seemed to grow thicker, swirling around them like an oppressive cloud, alive, moving and twisting in ways that made no sense. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, warping, buckling with each step. The trees, the road, the figures, they all seemed to bend in and out of existence, warping in the fog as though the world itself was collapsing. Alex blinked rapidly, trying to clear their vision, but it only seemed to make the fog worse. The shadows in the mist stretched unnaturally long, reaching out toward them like fingers, clawing at the air. Everything felt wrong, like the very fabric of reality was being undone, thread by thread. The whispers swelled, filling Alex's mind with a constant, maddening hum. Every direction seemed to bleed into the next, and the figures, now more than ever, felt like they were closing in from all sides. Their eyes burned brighter as the fog thickened, their forms flickering like the images in a broken film reel, yet they remained a constant presence, relentless and alive. Alex's heart pounded in their chest, their breath coming in shallow gasps. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating, dragging them further into madness. They spun around, trying to orient themselves, but the fog disoriented them completely. The road, the trees, the landscape, it was all the same. It was all swallowed by the haze. Nothing made sense. The tire iron felt heavier in Alex's hands, as if it too was being drawn into the fog, consumed by the emptiness of this place. They could hear the figures moving around them, closer, closer, the sound of their footsteps soft but deliberate. The mist pressed against their skin, cold and damp, crawling into their lungs. They're not real, Alex thought, but the thought did little to ease the terror. The fog, though not tangible, felt all-consuming. It wasn't just the figures, they were the environment, the very air that pressed in from all sides, squeezing Alex's sanity, warping their mind. It felt like a nightmare, no, worse than a nightmare. It felt like a place where the rules of reality didn't apply, where nothing was as it seemed. Alex stepped back, their foot slipping on the wet gravel, and they stumbled, a moment of unbalance that almost made them fall. They caught themselves, panicking, but when they looked up again, the landscape had shifted. The fog had deepened. The trees were no longer where they had been. The road had twisted again. They were still trapped. Alex's heart raced, pounding in their ears. The whispering, the wailing, the distorted cries for help, they were becoming unbearable. Every sound seemed to echo in the fog, reverberating inside Alex's skull, each one feeling like a personal accusation. "You can't leave." The voice sounded like it was coming from inside their head, a deep, guttural whisper that made the hair on the back of Alex's neck stand on end. The fog seemed to pulse with it, as though the very air was breathing with the voices. Alex clenched their fists around the tire iron, feeling the cold metal, but it didn't feel like it was their own body anymore. It felt like the fog had taken them, that they were part of this place now. The figures were moving again, closer, their forms becoming sharper, more defined despite the fog, their red eyes glimmering with cruel intent. The whispers shifted, changed until they were no longer accusations, no longer cries for help. Now, they were taunting, mocking. You can't escape. You're one of us now. The fog swirled and churned, and Alex tried to push through it, tried to move, but every direction felt the same. The ground felt wrong beneath their feet, uneven, like it was constantly shifting. And then the trees, they began to move. The branches reached, bending toward Alex, their gnawed limbs twisting like skeletal hands. A cold sweat broke out across Alex's brow as the figure with the glowing red eyes appeared in front of them again, standing so close now that they could feel the oppressive weight of its gaze. Its mouth opened, not to speak, but to reveal a jagged row of sharp teeth that seemed to grow in the mist. The figure's form was fading and reappearing, like it didn't even belong in the same space as Alex anymore. The tire iron, once a weapon of defiance, now felt completely useless. Alex swung it again, this time at the figure's glowing red eyes, but it passed through the entity like smoke, dispersing into the fog without any resistance. There was no fight, no escape. And as Alex collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed, the last shred of their sanity slipping away, they understood this wasn't a fight they could win. The fog, the entities, the haunting whispers, it was all part of them now. And they were trapped. Forever. Alex stumbled back toward the car, their steps unsteady, their mind in a haze. The fog seemed to press harder against them, as if it were trying to pull them deeper into its suffocating grip. Their heart pounded erratically, the oppressive weight of guilt and terror still suffocating their every breath. The entities were no longer just around them, they were in every corner of their mind, swirling, whispering, demanding acknowledgement for every mistake, every wrong. The car was a small refuge in this nightmare, a last bastion of something familiar, something that could still offer a sense of control, even if it was just the illusion of safety. Alex reached the door, hands trembling as they fumbled with the handle, desperate to get back inside and escape whatever had taken hold of the world outside. The cold metal felt alien in their grip, like the fog itself had seeped into the car. The moment they slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, a small sense of relief washed over them. But it was fleeting. Alex's eyes scanned the car, instinctively searching for anything out of place. That's when they saw it. The windows were covered in faint, twisting symbols, scratches etched into the glass, some barely visible, others glowing with an eerie, pulsing light. They looked like words, symbols from an ancient language, written in hurried, jagged strokes. The glow was soft at first, subtle, but as Alex stared, it grew stronger, pulsating rhythmically, as though the markings were alive. Their breath caught in their throat as they leaned closer, heart racing once again. The symbols weren't just on the windows, they were in them, as if carved into the very structure of the glass, beneath the surface. The light they emitted flickered, as though responding to Alex's proximity, the glow growing more intense and erratic with every passing second. Alex's fingers hovered over the symbols on the window, hesitant but driven by the urge to understand. They traced one of the marks, feeling a strange vibration beneath their touch, as if the glass was reacting to their presence. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was as though the symbols were inside their head now, pulling at their thoughts, urging them to remember something they had forgotten. The glow pulsed again, brighter, then dimmer, almost like a heartbeat. It was rhythmic, alive. Then Alex's gaze moved down to the hood of the car, and they felt their stomach drop. The same symbols were etched there, glowing faintly through the fog. The entire surface of the hood was covered in them, hundreds of markings, spiraling out from a single point in the center, radiating outward like some kind of occult pattern. The symbols were alive, responding to the fog, to the unseen forces surrounding them, to the figures that watched from the mist. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The markings, they weren't random. They were deliberate. And they were familiar, in a way that made Alex's skin crawl. A memory flickered in the back of their mind, just out of reach. Something forgotten, something hidden, something that had called them here, to this cursed road, to this nightmarish place. It was the road. The same symbols had appeared when they first took the detour, when the fog had begun to thicken. The symbols weren't just on the car, they were part of the road, part of the mist, part of the haunting that surrounded them. The same force that had chased Alex was now within the car. And it was growing stronger. Alex slammed their hands down on the steering wheel in frustration, trying to block out the voices, the growing fear. The whispers outside were louder now, twisting into something primal, desperate, and wild. The symbols on the glass pulsed faster, their light becoming almost unbearable. But it wasn't just the symbols that unnerved Alex, it was the sensation creeping up from deep within them, the sudden clarity that these symbols weren't just a part of the environment. They were connected to something Alex had done. Something Alex had missed. The fog wasn't just an accident of nature. It was a manifestation of something far older, far more sinister. And Alex was right in the middle of it, caught in the web of something that had been waiting for them. With trembling hands, Alex reached for the ignition. It was time to leave. But as they turned the key, the engine sputtered, once, twice, before it finally roared to life. The symbols on the car seemed to pulse one final time, as if acknowledging their escape, but as the car jolted forward, Alex felt the weight of them pressing down, felt the eyes of the figures burning into their back. The fog thickened again, and Alex realized, with growing horror, that no matter how far they drove, no matter how fast they went, they were still trapped in a world where the rules had changed. They weren't going anywhere. They were already where they had always been. The mist had swallowed them whole. The car hummed down the road, the tires crunching over the gravel, but to Alex, it felt like the car was moving through an empty void. The world outside had become a blur of mist and shadow, the fog pressing in like an invisible wall. The eerie quiet that followed the engine's roar was suffocating, more so than any whisper had been. The whispers had not stopped, though. They were different now, shifting, echoing through the car's interior. At first, they had been faint murmurs, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all around. Now, the voices were clearer, each one distinct, as if they were speaking directly into Alex's ears, layering on top of each other in a disturbing chorus. She was lost, just like you. We tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. He never made it out, and neither will you. Alex's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly their knuckles ached, and yet the voices kept coming, louder with every mile. They could hear them, each one more human than the last, but the words twisted, their meanings distorted in an agonizing way. Each phrase felt like it was dredging up some forgotten memory, some lost piece of their past, something they didn't want to remember. For a moment, Alex thought they could block it out. Ignore it. But the voices weren't fading, they were growing, intertwining like threads of a twisted web. They spoke of lost travelers, of people who had driven the very same stretch of road, only to disappear without a trace. Those same stories, those same souls, were the ones that lingered in the fog now, desperate to share their fates, as though hoping to be heard, hoping that someone would understand what had happened to them. The air inside the car grew colder, and Alex shivered, eyes darting around, searching for some sign, some direction to make sense of it all. The road, the fog, the relentless whispers, it was all blending into one unending nightmare. They weren't just in this place anymore, they were part of it. Then, One voice, louder and clearer than the rest, cut through the dissonance. It was a man's voice, ragged and broken, but desperate. I tried to stop her. I tried to tell her not to drive through the fog. Alex's pulse quickened. The voice was familiar, and yet they couldn't place it. A memory tugged at the edge of their consciousness, something forgotten, something buried so deep it was almost painful to recall. I tried to stop her, and now we're both here. Trapped. Alex's eyes widened, and the car swerved dangerously for a moment as a rush of panic flooded their chest. The fog outside seemed to close in tighter, the darkness consuming the road. They couldn't escape. Not this time. The spirits. The voices. The travelers who never made it out. Alex's mind raced. It wasn't just random. It wasn't a coincidence. The figures, the voices, the distorted whispers, they were trapped here, just like they were. The fog was not just a natural occurrence, nor was it something Alex could outrun. It was an endless cycle, a trap set for any soul that dared to venture too close. And the spirits, the ones now speaking, were the proof of that. They were stuck, condemned to wander these roads for eternity, unable to move on, unable to break free from the hold of the fog. Alex's grip tightened on the wheel as their thoughts spiraled. The whispers weren't just warnings. They were cries for help, tales of pain and frustration, reliving the moment of their death over and over again. Alex now understood they were part of the fog, part of the curse that kept these spirits in limbo. She doesn't realize. She doesn't understand that the road is a prison. A sickening chill crawled down Alex's spine as the voice faded into another. The whispers continued to spiral around them, each one blending with the others, drowning out any possibility of escape. It never ends. The road keeps you, whether you like it or not. You'll never leave. We never left. Alex could barely breathe, the suffocating weight of the fog pressing against the car's windows. The mist had now completely obscured any sign of the road ahead, the darkness closing in like an unbroken wall. The red eyes, the figures, were everywhere, always just out of sight. They could feel their presence now, an undeniable force that had taken root in this place. The voices grew louder, the tales of the spirits more desperate. Alex was hearing fragments now, disjointed memories of the past, lives lost, mistakes made, and roads that went on forever, never leading to freedom. I didn't know it was the last time I would see my family. I should have turned back when I had the chance. We tried to leave. We all tried to leave. Alex could feel the weight of their guilt, the realization that the road itself was a kind of purgatory, a place that kept souls locked in an endless loop, trapped within the fog's embrace. They could sense it now. The fog knew them. It had been waiting for them, just like it had waited for all the others. It wasn't just the spirits who were trapped. It was Alex too. They were bound to this place, to this road. There was no way out. The fog wasn't just around them. It was in them now, suffocating them, erasing them from the world, leaving nothing but the whispers and the unending cycle of despair. And deep down, Alex knew they would never leave. The cold air inside the car felt like it was seeping into Alex's bones, each breath a struggle against the suffocating weight of the fog. The whispers seemed to push in from every direction, their voices tangled and desperate, as though they were pressing in from the very walls of the car itself. Every word, every syllable was a reminder that there was no escape, no way to outrun this nightmare. The road stretched on endlessly, a dark, twisting path that led nowhere but further into the depths of the fog. But amidst the fear, Amidst the growing sense of hopelessness, something stirred within Alex. A memory, faint and distant, pushed its way to the surface of their mind, clawing its way out from the shadows where it had been buried. A memory from their childhood, one they had almost forgotten. Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and they felt a rush of nausea as the memory resurfaced, sharp and vivid. It was strange how clear it was now, like the fog had lifted from their mind long enough to see the truth, even if it was a truth they had never wanted to face. They were young, no older than 10 or 11, sitting in the back seat of their parents' car on a rainy evening. It was late, much too late for anyone to be driving through the winding back roads of North Carolina, but their father was in a hurry. The air had been thick with moisture, and the road twisted like a serpent, the trees pressing in on either side. The headlights barely cut through the dense fog that had rolled in, obscuring everything in its path. It was the kind of fog that felt alive, heavy and suffocating, pressing against the car, blurring the line between the real world and something darker, something more dangerous. The memory came in flashes, distant and disjointed. The car's tires skimming across the wet pavement, the sound of the windshield wipers fighting against the storm. Alex could hear their mother's voice, soft but anxious, urging their father to slow down. They could hear the tension in her tone, the fear in her words. "John, it's getting worse. We need to pull over. Please." But their father, always so calm, always so determined, had just shaken his head, glancing briefly at the rearview mirror. "We're fine. Just a little fog, that's all." Alex's young mind hadn't understood the danger then, hadn't realized how close they had come to disaster. But as the memory unfolded in the haze of their mind, they could hear the sound of the tires skidding, the screeching of metal on wet road, and the sharp, terrifying sound of something large, something unseen, moving through the fog. The car had swerved, sliding out of control, the world spinning as the headlights revealed only darkness and mist, no solid ground to grip, no sign of safety. There had been no warning, just the sudden weightlessness, the sense that they were floating, trapped in the very fog that had seemed so innocuous just moments before. And then, there was the crash. The image of it was blurry, but Alex could still hear the crunch of metal, the thud of the car hitting something solid in the night. The feeling of their stomach lurching in their chest. Their mother's screams. The way their father's face had gone pale, wide-eyed, and frantic as he tried to steer the car, to regain control. And then, everything had gone silent. Alex remembered feeling the cold shock of the air as they stepped out of the car, the fog swirling around them like a thick, impenetrable blanket. The sound of their father calling for help, his voice distant, muffled, as if the fog had stolen it away, leaving only an eerie, oppressive silence in its place. They had been lucky. The crash hadn't been fatal. But that night, something had shifted in Alex. Something had changed. The fog had been more than just a weather phenomenon. It had been a warning, a force that moved beyond the natural world, something that twisted reality and pushed them into a place where the rules no longer applied. It was as though the fog had reached out and grabbed them and whispered into their very souls, and had marked them. Alex's breath quickened as they remembered that night in greater detail, pieces of the memory falling into place, connecting in ways they hadn't understood before. Their family had been lucky, but others had not been so fortunate. The fog, the same thick, oppressive mist that now surrounded Alex, had been there that night. It had watched them, and it had come after them in a way that Alex had never truly understood. But now, as they sat in the car, the fog outside pressing against the windows like some unseen force, Alex realized with growing horror that the events of that night weren't just some distant, forgotten memory. The fog had followed them. It had waited. It had been a warning, a sign, an omen that Alex had missed. And now, the same fog had found them again. It was the same fog, the same road. But there was something more. Something Alex had never understood about that night, something that now clicked into place. That night, there had been no explanation for the crash. No cause. It was as if the fog had manipulated time and warped the world just long enough to bring them to the edge of disaster. Alex was no longer certain that they had survived that crash at all. What if they hadn't? What if the fog had claimed them then, and what they were experiencing now, what they were feeling now, was just the final stretch of their journey, the one that had begun long ago? The truth was clearer now. The road had never ended. The fog had never let go. And the moment they had driven down this cursed path, they had walked right back into the trap. Alex's hands trembled slightly as they glanced down at the GPS, hoping for some sign of progress, some indication that they were getting closer to the end of this endless stretch of road. But instead, the screen flickered erratically, its usual precision replaced by chaotic flashes of strange symbols and numbers. The usual calm voice of the GPS, which had once provided directions with an almost comforting detachment, had gone silent. The screen was now filled with nonsensical coordinates, numbers that seemed to loop back on themselves in an endless cycle. Alex's eyes flicked back and forth between the road and the screen, trying to make sense of the information, but it didn't add up. The coordinates pointed to places that didn't exist, roads that led nowhere. Suddenly, the words on the screen began to change. Turn back. The message was brief, but chilling. Alex blinked and stared at the flashing screen, trying to reason it away. It must be malfunctioning. Just a glitch in the system. But the fog outside pressed against the car like a living thing, pushing it on every side, making it impossible to see anything beyond the headlights. The road was still twisting, still stretching endlessly ahead. There's no turning back, though, Alex thought desperately. The fog had already swallowed them whole. Then the GPS shifted again. No escape. The words appeared in bold, jagged letters, as though they were being etched into the screen by some unseen force. Alex's heart skipped a beat. They stared at the flashing message, unable to comprehend what was happening. The road outside had begun to blur, and the landscape had become a distorted reflection of itself, like something out of a fevered dream. It was as though the GPS was trying to communicate something deeper, something far more unsettling than a simple technical malfunction. No escape. Alex gritted their teeth, their stomach turning. What does that mean? The message flashed again. This time, it wasn't just a message. It was a command. Turn back. The voice of the GPS, if it could be called that, sounded faint now, like a distant whisper. It echoed in the silence of the car, a presence that felt far more sinister than any technical glitch should have. Alex felt a cold chill run down their spine, the sense that something was watching them, waiting for them to make a move. They glanced up at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the red eyes of the figure from before, but the mirror was empty. Only the swirling fog, dense and unyielding, was there. The next words flashed across the screen, the font now distorted, flickering like a dying light. You are already lost. The words seemed to resonate with something deep within Alex's chest. Something in the pit of their stomach twisted and churned, as though the very air in the car had thickened, become denser, more suffocating. Alex swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. No. This isn't real. This can't be real. But the fog outside was pressing in, more intense now than ever. The road, the GPS, the whispers, all seemed to blur together into a single, unyielding force. The feeling of being trapped grew stronger with every passing second. The GPS flickered again, and this time, the coordinates that appeared weren't numbers. They were a series of strange symbols, twisting, distorted shapes that made no sense to the rational mind. They swirled and shifted as if alive, the image flashing in front of Alex's eyes in rapid succession, making it impossible to focus. Turn back. Turn back. It's too late. The words seemed to morph into one another, looping in a relentless, maddening cycle. It wasn't just the GPS anymore. The entire car seemed to vibrate with an energy that Alex couldn't explain. The whispers were growing louder, more urgent. The car itself seemed to hum, vibrating with an unnatural energy, as though the very engine was aware of what was happening. Alex's breath quickened as the screen flashed again. This time, a message came through that made their blood run cold. You've seen the truth now. There is no way out. The car jolted suddenly, and for a split second, Alex thought they might lose control. The fog outside pressed harder, as if trying to force the car off the road, and the headlights barely cut through the mist. The feeling of being suffocated, of being trapped within this dark, endless loop, overwhelmed Alex's senses. How long had they been on this road? Hours? Days? Time had lost all meaning. The GPS flickered once more, and then the final message appeared, its letters bold and final. Welcome home. The car's headlights cast eerie shadows against the fog, and for a fleeting moment, Alex thought they saw something moving in the mist, figures, indistinct shapes with glowing red eyes. The road ahead seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, repeating itself over and over again, like a distorted reflection in a cracked mirror. The fog was no longer just an obstruction, it was a force, a presence that had drawn Alex into its web and wouldn't let them go. The whispers were now so loud that Alex could hear them in their mind, louder than the engine, louder than anything else. We told you there was no escape. The car jolted again, harder this time, and Alex's heart stopped. The road stretched before them, but the destination was no longer clear. There was no turning back. The fog had them, and they would never leave. Alex's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white from the pressure. Panic churned in their gut, but they fought to suppress it. Stay calm. Think logically. Their mind raced, grasping for any rational explanation. There has to be one. There must be. The GPS still flickered in and out, its cryptic messages flashing across the screen, but Alex refused to let it control them. They had been through situations like this before. A breakdown. A glitch in technology. Maybe there was something wrong with the car or the road. A malfunctioning GPS could cause disorientation. The fog, dense and thick, was no different from what they'd encountered in the past, a bad weather system that made everything look the same. Alex exhaled sharply, trying to ground themselves in the present. They glanced at the windshield, hoping to see some sign of civilization, a house, a road sign, something to prove they were moving forward. But the road stretched on, an endless ribbon of wet asphalt swallowed by the impenetrable fog. There was no sign of any other cars, no lights, no landmarks, only the monotonous line of the road winding through the mist. It's just the fog, Alex repeated to themselves, the words sounding hollow even in their own mind. The engine hummed steadily beneath them, and for a moment, Alex felt a flicker of hope. They might be able to escape this madness. They might still be in control. Just keep driving. They pressed the accelerator, feeling the car surge forward. The headlights barely cut through the fog, but the road appeared to stretch ahead, its winding turns marking each passing minute. Yet, despite their best efforts, something wasn't right. The landscape was too familiar. It was as if the road had never changed, as if they were still driving on the same stretch of asphalt they had been on for hours. The fog pressed against the windows with a suffocating intensity, and as Alex glanced at the rearview mirror, their stomach dropped. The same stretch of road, the same curves, the same dense mist. The trees, those same twisted, dark silhouettes, loomed on either side like silent sentinels. Hadn't they just passed that curve? They hadn't seen another car for miles, yet the road was still winding, still the same, still endless. Alex's gaze snapped back to the GPS screen. It had shifted again, back to those strange coordinates, back to those cryptic words. Turn back. Alex's breath caught. No. This can't be happening. It must be a malfunction. They fumbled with the GPS, tapping it frantically, trying to reset it, but it wouldn't respond. The coordinates only continued to loop, numbers bouncing between strange points. Just a glitch. But the words were getting under Alex's skin now, crawling like insects beneath their thoughts, gnawing at their rational mind. No. Stay calm. Alex turned their focus back to the road. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, no signs of life, no change. It's an optical illusion. It has to be. Something in the fog. The lights playing tricks. Alex gritted their teeth and took a deep breath. This is just a bad storm. I'm just disoriented. I'll find a way out of this. But the road refused to relent. Every turn led to the same stretch of mist-covered highway. Every curve, every intersection was a mirror image of the last. It was like they were driving in a loop, an endless, unyielding loop. They couldn't outrun it. The fog was too thick, and the world around them was warping, twisting. The sense of time was beginning to slip away. In a desperate attempt to break the cycle, Alex slammed the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. The tires skidded briefly across the wet road before coming to a stop. Alex's chest heaved with panic as they looked around. There was nothing. No change. The fog pressed against the windows, as dense and relentless as ever. The engine idled steadily, the only sound in the silence. Alex's mind raced for an explanation, any explanation. But none came. Their heart hammered in their chest as they slowly turned to face the road ahead. Why doesn't it change? Their thoughts spiraled, every rational explanation slipping away like sand through their fingers. The fog had become a living thing, a force beyond their understanding, twisting the road, making it impossible to escape. The sky was dark, and the horizon didn't exist. There was no beginning or end, just the road that looped back on itself in an eternal cycle. Alex tried to fight it. Tried to reason with themselves. It's just a road. It's just the fog. Just a trick of the mind. I can't be stuck. I can't be lost. There's no way. But no matter what Alex did, no matter how they tried to turn or drive in a different direction, they always ended up back in the same place. The same stretch of road, the same thick, suffocating fog. Every turn, every shift in the wheel only brought them back to where they started. The road is not real. It's not real. This is not real. But even as the thought passed through Alex's mind, they knew that it didn't matter. The truth was already too clear. There was no explanation. No logical reason. No escape. The road was part of something much darker, something that they couldn't outrun, couldn't reason away. The fog had claimed them, and it wasn't letting them go. Alex sat frozen, staring into the dense fog, their hands trembling against the steering wheel. The endless road stretched out before them, a looping path they couldn't escape. The car felt suffocating, as if the fog itself had seeped inside, wrapping around their chest and making every breath harder to take. The whispers from outside had grown to an unbearable crescendo, a haunting symphony of voices that seemed to seep into their very soul. But then, amidst the overwhelming tension, something shifted. The air grew still, the whispers suddenly vanishing as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. The oppressive fog remained, but now there was an eerie silence. In the rearview mirror, Alex thought they saw something move, a figure, standing motionless in the mist. Their hearts skipped a beat, a jolt of adrenaline shooting through their veins. Slowly, almost unwillingly, they turned to face the mirror again. There it was. The figure from earlier. The one with the glowing red eyes. It stood just at the edge of the fog, barely visible, yet its presence was undeniable. Alex's breath caught in his throat, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The figure hadn't moved, but Alex could feel it, its gaze fixed on them, waiting. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The car idled in the thick fog, the only sound the faint hum of the engine. Alex's mind raced. How long has it been there? How long had they been trapped in this place, circling this road over and over again? And then, the figure spoke. The voice wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was like an echo, deep and resonant, that seemed to vibrate within Alex's skull. It wasn't just heard, it was felt, reverberating in their very bones. The voice was a chilling, inhuman rasp, but there was a strange calmness to it, as though it had all the time in the world to watch Alex squirm. Escape requires a sacrifice. Alex's body tensed, the words sinking in like ice-cold daggers. They didn't understand. Sacrifice? The word echoed in their mind, twisting with confusion. Alex tried to respond, tried to say something, anything, but their voice seemed lost. Their throat was tight, constricted, as if the very air had been sucked out of the car. The figure remained still, but its red eyes burned brighter now, seeping into the fog like an ominous beacon. It seemed to sense Alex's fear, feeding off it, as though it was savoring the moment. There is always a price, the figure continued, its voice seeping into Alex's mind, twisting their thoughts. The road, the fog, they are hungry. They need you, Alex. They will never let you leave without it. Alex's heart pounded in their chest. The words seemed impossible, absurd even, yet the figure's presence, the weight of its voice, made them feel like they were standing on the edge of some vast, dark truth. The fog had been more than just a weather phenomenon, it had been a living thing all along, pulling them in, guiding them to this moment. Alex's mind raced. A sacrifice? What does that mean? What does it want from me? The question pounded relentlessly in their mind, but no answer came. All they could do was stare into those red eyes, the only thing in the world that seemed real at this moment. The figure seemed to sense Alex's turmoil, and it shifted slightly, its form distorting within the fog. Time is running out, it whispered, its voice a low, dark promise. The fog will consume you. Or you can give it what it craves. One life, one soul, for your freedom. The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating, each syllable like a weight pressing down on Alex's chest. A life? My life? Someone else's? The figure didn't move any closer, but the suffocating pressure of its presence grew, filling the car, the space around them. Alex could feel their mind beginning to unravel, the terror creeping in with each passing second. What was it asking? What was it demanding? In the silence that followed, Alex could hear the sound of their own heartbeat, loud and frantic in their ears. The fog pressed in closer, the whispers now a constant hum in the background, like an unseen crowd murmuring in anticipation. The figure was still watching them, waiting. Then, the fog seemed to shift, just a subtle movement, but enough to make Alex's blood run cold. The darkness in the air grew thicker, more oppressive, as if the very environment was pressing down on them. Alex took a shuddering breath, their eyes darting between the figure and the road ahead. There was no way out. No way to reason with it, no way to fight it. The figure had made that clear. The fog had made that clear. The words repeated in their mind over and over. One life. One soul. Alex's gaze shot back to the figure, desperate, pleading. What am I supposed to do? But the red eyes were unwavering, and the fog continued to close in, as if the world was narrowing to nothing. It was a choice, a horrific choice, and Alex knew the answer even before the figure spoke again, its voice softer now, like a final warning. You make the choice, Alex. The fog always gets what it wants. The air grew heavy. The car's interior was colder now, the mist creeping in through the windows, the outlines of the trees blurring in the periphery. Alex's breath was ragged, the suffocating pressure of the moment threatening to swallow them whole. The fog wasn't just an obstacle, it was the beginning of the end. And Alex was caught in its grasp, with no way out but one. The price had been set. Alex's mind spun in frantic circles, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on them like a vice. One life. One soul. It echoed endlessly in their thoughts, an insistent refrain that refused to fade. The fog outside the car had thickened, now pressing so close that it seemed to pulse with a dark, insidious life of its own. The figure with the red eyes stood motionless in the distance, its gaze never leaving Alex. Its presence was a constant, like a shadow looming over everything, suffocating the air in the car. What does it want? Alex's breath came in ragged gasps, their heart hammering painfully in their chest. Their hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that their fingers ached, the tremors threatening to break their focus. How can I? No, they couldn't think about it. It was impossible. The very thought made their stomach churn, the idea of sacrificing another person, or even themselves, for escape. It went against everything they'd ever believed in, everything they knew about right and wrong. But then, the whispers outside grew louder again, creeping under the door like a draft. A low, continuous murmur, distant cries mixed with faint laughter. It sounded almost familiar. The voices swirled around Alex, invasive, unrelenting. They were no longer just whispers. They were demands. Escape. 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 Alex closed their eyes, pressing their palms against their face in an attempt to block out the oppressive sounds. This can't be real. This can't be happening. It's just a nightmare. It has to be. But with each passing moment, that comforting thought slipped further away, like sand falling through their fingers. Every detail felt too vivid, too real, the fog, the figure, the suffocating silence between each breath. The chill creeping into the car from the windows. And then, the words that cut through the fear, that gnawed at their sanity, one life, one soul. The internal struggle began to intensify, a battle between what was right and the instinctive fear of being trapped forever. Alex gripped the wheel tighter, their palms slick with sweat. They'd never been the type of person to give in to fear, to allow panic to cloud their judgment. But this wasn't a simple fear. It was a primal terror, an overwhelming sense of doom that seemed to swallow any shred of hope. The fog always gets what it wants. The figure's voice echoed in Alex's mind again, each word more final than the last. The fog. That dark, suffocating presence that had been following them since the moment they first veered off course. It wasn't just the road that was trapped, it was Alex. They were the prey, caught in a twisted game they couldn't understand. Alex's pulse raced, and their thoughts splintered in all directions. If I just drive. But no, the road wouldn't change. They'd been through it already. Every twist, every turn, led them right back to the same fog, the same endless loop. Nothing made sense. Maybe I just need to keep going. If I try hard enough, I'll break free. I just have to keep trying. But even as the thought entered their mind, the whispering grew louder. The words from the figure began to take root, burrowing into Alex's brain. Escape requires a sacrifice. The thought of another person, an innocent person, being used to break the cycle of torment twisted Alex's stomach. I can't do it. I can't hurt someone else just to save myself. The moral line seemed clear, almost painfully obvious. They weren't a killer. They weren't capable of that kind of sacrifice. There's got to be another way. There has to be. But the more they thought about it, the less that seemed possible. Every option seemed to lead them back here, to the figure, to the fog, to the choice they never wanted to make. But if I don't do it, what will happen? The question lingered, unspoken, in the pit of their stomach. Would the fog simply consume them? Would they be trapped here forever, a prisoner of their own hesitation, a victim of their own indecision? Was that what the figure wanted? To force them to make a choice between their morality and survival? A sudden, sharp sound echoed outside, as though something had scraped against the side of the car. Alex's eyes snapped to the window, but there was nothing there, just the swirling fog. The tapping started again, soft at first, like someone gently rapping on the glass, followed by a slow, rhythmic scratching, as if something or someone was dragging their fingers across the surface. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Their breath caught in their throat, and they instinctively reached for the door lock, though they knew it was useless. What is out there? What if I can't escape? What if it's too late? The fear in their chests started to morph into something else, something darker. Desperation. The desire to escape, to break free from this never-ending loop, began to eclipse everything else. I can't stay here. I can't. I won't. The idea of being trapped forever, of losing everything to this fog, was too much to bear. Alex's thoughts began to spiral into chaos. They had to make a choice. The idea of giving in, of offering something, someone, in exchange for freedom felt wrong, but the pull of the unknown was stronger now, almost unbearable. They could feel it, an undeniable force pushing them toward the answer, toward the inevitable choice. Maybe I can just make it quick. Maybe it won't be that bad. But deep down, they knew that wasn't true. The fog would never let them go without a price. It would never stop. It would never let them be free. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they seemed to swallow all other sound. They pressed in on Alex, suffocating them from all sides. There was no more time to think. No more time to reason. The fog was coming for them. And soon, Alex would have to choose. The fog seemed to breathe, pulsing like a living thing, wrapping tighter and tighter around the car. The air inside the vehicle grew colder, suffocating, as if the very oxygen was being drained by the thick mist pressing in on all sides. Alex's hands trembled as they gripped the steering wheel, their vision narrowing, the world outside becoming an indistinct swirl of gray and shadow. The road ahead was swallowed by the fog, and it felt as if they were driving through a void, an endless stretch of nothingness. Is this real? The thought pierced Alex's mind, but it was quickly swallowed by the mounting pressure of their surroundings. The boundaries of reality seemed to bend and twist, like a funhouse mirror warping everything Alex had ever known. The car, the road, even the air itself seemed to shift in and out of focus. The headlights cut through the fog, but the beams barely reached a few feet before they were swallowed whole. Alex's breathing quickened, the suffocating weight of the fog pushing down on their chest. Their heart pounded in their ears, and a cold sweat covered their skin. The whispers had returned, louder now, like a chorus of voices speaking in low, guttural tones. But now, there was something else. Faint sounds, far off but growing clearer with each passing second, cries. Not just whispers, but full cries of agony, of fear. The cries seemed to echo from all directions, from every corner of the mist. It wasn't just one voice. It was a multitude, distant and yet achingly close, like a cacophony of suffering trapped in the fog. The sound tore at Alex's nerves, making their skin crawl, their pulse race even faster. No. Please. Alex flinched, their hands gripping the wheel so tightly their knuckles turned white. The voice was clear now, a woman's voice, full of terror and pain. Was it real? Was someone out there? They turned to look out the window, but the fog was too thick, too oppressive. There was nothing to see, only the dark, swirling mist. The figure with the red eyes had vanished, but the sense of its presence lingered, as though it was waiting for them to make a move, to make the wrong move. Another cry pierced the air, this time a child's voice, desperate, pleading. "Help me," it sobbed, over and over, a broken sound that twisted Alex's gut into knots. What was this? The road was gone, the world was gone, and all that remained was the fog and the tortured cries that filled the air. They couldn't see who, or what, was making them. But the sheer desperation in the voices was enough to make Alex's heart ache, to make every instinct scream in warning. A flash of light. A brief, distorted image flickered in the mist, a shadow, a figure stumbling, their face a blur, twisted in anguish. The vision lasted only a second, but it burned into Alex's mind. The figure seemed familiar, a face from the past, but it was gone before Alex could process it, swallowed by the fog. The cries grew louder, closer now, as if they were inside the car, surrounding Alex. It's not real. It's just the fog. Just the fog. The mantra repeated in their mind, but the cries, the pain, felt so tangible, so real. The world around them had lost all sense of order. Time seemed to stretch and bend, disorienting Alex as the air grew colder, heavier. Suddenly, a new sound emerged, sharp, screeching, like fingernails dragging across glass. It came from somewhere in the mist, too loud, too close. Alex's head whipped around, searching for the source, but the fog had swallowed it all. There was no escaping it. The fog wasn't just fog anymore. It had become something far worse, something malevolent that clung to them, pressing them deeper into this nightmare. Through the distorted lens of their panic, Alex saw flashes of faces. A man, covered in blood, his mouth open in a silent scream. A woman, her eyes wide with terror, reaching out in desperation. Then, a child, frozen in place, staring at Alex with vacant, pleading eyes. They were all around them, all trapped in this never-ending fog, their cries filling the air. Each vision was fleeting, lasting only a moment before vanishing, but the images burned in Alex's mind, haunting them. "You're not alone." The voice came again, distant but clear. It wasn't the figure this time. It was a low, whispering murmur coming from somewhere deep within the fog. "You're not alone, Alex." The words seemed to wrap around them, tightening like a noose. And as the fog pressed in closer, as the cries and whispers grew louder, Alex realized the horrifying truth: they weren't the first to be trapped here. The fog had consumed them all. And Alex wasn't going to be the last. The reality around them twisted again, and for a moment, the world seemed to fracture. The cries, the voices, everything became a blur, a suffocating sea of torment and confusion. The air grew colder, impossibly cold, and Alex felt a chill seep deep into their bones. "It's not real. It's not real." But the thought felt weaker now, as if the fog itself was reaching into their mind, erasing their ability to think clearly. The boundaries between the past and present blurred, the faces of the lost merging with the whispers in the fog, their voices growing in intensity. Alex's head spun, their vision wavering. They had to get out. They had to escape. But the fog had already taken everything. The sacrifice had already begun. And as the world around them dissolved into the endless mist, the truth became clear. There would be no escape. Desperation gnawed at Alex's insides, twisting their stomach into knots as the fog continued to close in. The cries of agony and the distorted voices swirled around them, too real, too suffocating. "What do I have left?" The thought was a whisper, one that slid into Alex's mind like the others before it, relentless, unavoidable. There had to be something that could break the cycle. "Please." The plea escaped Alex's lips, soft and helpless, swallowed by the endless fog. "The sacrifice." The words the figure had spoken echoed in their mind, chilling and certain. Alex's fingers twitched at the steering wheel, their eyes darting across the dashboard as if the answer would appear written in the dark. They had tried everything else, driving faster, reasoning, hoping that the fog might lift if they simply pressed on. But nothing had worked. The fog was unyielding, and the voices, growing louder and more insistent, never stopped. One life. One soul. Alex's breath hitched, the words like a blade scraping against their ribs. But they weren't ready to accept that. There has to be another way. A choice that doesn't involve. They couldn't bring themselves to think it, let alone say it. But if there was a way out, if they could, just appease whatever was haunting them, whatever was pulling them deeper into this nightmare, maybe it would stop. Maybe the fog would fade. Alex's eyes landed on the dashboard again. The reflection of their face seemed pale and hollow in the dim glow of the headlights. And then, something familiar caught their eye, a small, worn leather wallet sitting on the passenger seat. The edges were frayed from years of use, the stitching slightly unraveling. Inside, there were photographs, old, yellowed photos that had been with Alex through almost everything. It was the one item from their childhood they could never bring themselves to part with. The picture of their father, the one where they were both smiling in front of their old house, stood out. The memory of that day was a bittersweet one. Their father had died when Alex was young, the sudden loss leaving an ache that never truly went away. Holding onto that picture, the last tangible piece of him, was the only comfort Alex had ever known, the only link to a life that felt so far removed from the cold, empty stretch of road they were now trapped on. Maybe this is what they want. Maybe if I give it to them. The thought crawled across Alex's mind, dark and uncomfortable. But what choice did they have? The fog was swallowing them whole, the whispers louder now, more urgent. Please, make it stop. Shakily, Alex reached over to the passenger seat, their fingers brushing against the worn leather of the wallet. They hesitated, just for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The cries from outside, the suffering, the pleading, grew louder in the confines of the car, as if they were coming from within the very walls of the vehicle now. The spirits that haunted the fog were closing in, and time was running out. With a deep, shuddering breath, Alex opened the wallet and pulled out the photograph of their father. For a moment, they simply stared at it, the smiling face of the man they once knew. The man they had lost. The man whose memory had been their only anchor. "I'm sorry, Dad," Alex whispered to the empty car, their voice breaking. The words felt hollow, meaningless against the weight of the fog and the growing presence outside. But they had to try. They couldn't just sit here, waiting for the spirits to take everything from them. They had to do something. With trembling hands, Alex opened the door, the cold rush of air hitting them like a slap. The fog outside was thick, smothering, but still, Alex stepped out, holding the photograph in their palm. They stared at it one last time, willing it to make sense, to be the answer they so desperately sought. As they held the photo up to the mist, offering it as a gift, a sacrifice, they whispered, "Please, take this. Take it, and let me go." The fog seemed to react, swirling around Alex's feet like a living entity, and for a moment, everything fell silent. The cries, the whispers, they all stopped. A heavy stillness filled the air, so thick it almost felt suffocating. Alex's heart skipped a beat as they looked around, waiting for some sign that it had worked, that the fog would lift, that the spirits would be appeased. But the silence dragged on, stretching into an unbearable eternity. Alex's pulse thudded in their ears, their breath coming in shallow gasps. Did it work? But then, slowly, the fog began to shift again, the weight returning, pressing harder, colder. The shadows in the mist seemed to grow darker, moving in patterns that felt deliberate. The whispering started again, but this time it was different. The voices were no longer distant, no longer simply crying out in pain. They were mocking now, low and mocking. "Is that all you have to offer?" The voice cut through the air, low and chilling, as if it were speaking from inside Alex's mind. The figure appeared again, stepping forward from the fog, its eyes glowing with that same malicious red light. It looked at Alex with a mix of pity and contempt, as if the offering meant nothing, like it had known all along that it would never be enough. "You think you can escape with trinkets and memories?" The figure's voice echoed around them, every word laced with venom. "There is no escape. There is only the fog. And you are mine." The photograph of Alex's father slipped from their hand, fluttering to the ground, and the fog swallowed it whole, just as it had swallowed everything else. The mocking laughter grew louder, more consuming. And as the figure took one slow step forward, Alex realized with cold clarity the sacrifice wasn't enough. The fog had no interest in possessions. It had no interest in memories. The only thing it wanted was a soul. The figure stood before Alex, its glowing red eyes now piercing through the fog like twin beacons, fixated on them with an intensity that sent a chill crawling up their spine. The mocking laughter faded into an ominous silence, and for a brief moment, the fog seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something more. Alex's chest tightened. The offer of a photograph, the last tangible link to their father, hadn't been enough. The figure's words had made that painfully clear. The spirits, the fog, the tormenting whispers, none of it had stopped, none of it had relented. And now, Alex realized with a sinking heart, they were about to demand more. The figure leaned closer, its form shifting and undulating in the mist, its red eyes growing brighter, filling the space with an almost unbearable weight. "You still don't understand, do you?" the voice rasped, but this time it wasn't the deep, distant growl from before. It was inside Alex's mind, closer, personal, intimate. "We have no need for your memories. No need for your trinkets." Alex's breath caught in her throat. The air seemed to thicken, becoming heavier with each passing second, the fog pressing in tighter around them as the figure's form blurred in and out of reality. The spirits that filled the mist, they were watching. Watching Alex, waiting. To escape, the figure continued, its voice now a low, hypnotic whisper that seemed to vibrate through Alex's very bones. "You must give us what you truly are. A piece of yourself, something more, something deeper. A soul, Alex. A soul in exchange for your life." The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and cold. Alex's knees buckled, and they staggered back, horrified, a cold sweat breaking out over their skin. A soul? The thought seemed impossible, surreal. How could they give away something so fundamental, something so ingrained in their very being? But the figure, now no longer just a singular entity but a swirling mass of shifting shadows, was unrelenting. It stepped forward, filling the space, suffocating the air. The eyes, those blood-red eyes, burned with a malevolent hunger. "You've already given us everything else, Alex," the voice coiled around them, suffocating, "your memories, your fears, your past. All we require now is the essence of who you are." Alex's heart thundered in their chest, the weight of what was being asked pressing down on them like a vice. The road ahead, the only road they had known for what felt like forever, was a dead end, a never-ending loop of torment. The fog was their prison, and the spirits were the wardens. "Give it to us now, and you may walk free," the figure promised, its voice dripping with dark temptation. "Fail to comply, and you will remain here, forever, lost, just like all the others who came before you." Alex's mind raced, the weight of the decision crushing them from all sides. There had to be another way. They couldn't just give up their soul. But as they scanned the empty road, the endless, fog-choked void stretching into eternity, Alex realized with sickening clarity that there was no other way. They had already tried everything. The only way out was to sacrifice what was left of them. A piece of their soul. A piece of themselves. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, as if sensing the shift in Alex's mind, its presence pressing in closer. "The price of your survival," it whispered, "is the very thing that makes you whole. What will you part with, Alex? What will you leave behind to escape?" Alex's hands shook, the weight of their own heartbeat pounding in their ears. They felt as though they were drowning, sinking deeper into a nightmare they couldn't escape, couldn't reason with. The fog was all around them, whispering promises, threats, demands. What did it want? The question gnawed at Alex's mind, a frantic desperation clawing at their thoughts. They could feel it, the suffocating pressure, the unbearable pull from the spirits, the sense that something precious was slipping away, beyond their control. In a moment of clarity, Alex understood. The figure wasn't just asking for a part of their soul, they were asking for the very core of their humanity. The essence of what made Alex, Alex. A piece of their will, their conscience, their spirit. The idea of giving it away was impossible. How could anyone simply let go of what made them who they were? But the figure's presence was overwhelming, its power undeniable. Alex had never felt so powerless, so insignificant. The fog felt alive now, pulsating, breathing, wrapping around their very being. It was a force they couldn't fight. Not physically. Not with reason. The choice hung before them like a yawning abyss: give up a piece of themselves and maybe escape, or remain trapped, lost forever in this endless cycle of mist and torment. The fog pulsed with an almost maddening rhythm, as if urging Alex to decide. What is left to sacrifice? And then, Alex knew. It wasn't a thing they could give away. It wasn't an object, or even a memory, that the fog desired. It was them, a part of their very identity, their soul, their essence. A piece of their being that defined them, that anchored them to the world. Would they let it go? Would they leave behind the core of who they were to survive? The fog grew thicker, the shadows darker, and the figure's eyes bore into them with a hunger that would not be denied. Alex's breath hitched, and without a word, they knew what must be done. It was too late for anything else. Alex stood frozen, the fog pressing in on them like a physical force, squeezing the breath from their lungs. The air was thick, damp, and cold, yet a burning warmth spread through their chest, the weight of their decision sinking in. The figure with the red eyes watched intently, its presence suffocating. It was no longer just a figure in the fog. It was the fog, the essence of it, the embodiment of everything that surrounded Alex. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. The spirits swirled, their voices rising and falling in a cacophony of torment. Their cries were like 1,000 lost souls, each one pleading, demanding, whispering promises of freedom or of eternal suffering. Alex closed their eyes for a moment, the pressure unbearable. There was no escape from this place. No logical explanation. No way out that didn't involve giving up something they couldn't bear to part with. The road, the fog, the endless cycle, it was all too much. I can't stay here forever, Alex thought, their breath shaky, trembling under the weight of the decision. I can't keep running. I can't outrun the fog. The red-eyed figure seemed to sense the shift in their thoughts, its eerie, glowing gaze burning brighter, more expectant. The air itself felt alive, electric, as if reality itself was bending around Alex's will. What will you give up, Alex? The figure's voice slithered through the mist, its words like tendrils creeping into their mind, twisting around their thoughts. To escape, you must leave behind your essence. What part of you will you surrender? Alex's heart pounded in their chest. The weight of their past, their mistakes, their fears, they had carried them for so long. And now, the weight of the spirits, the weight of the fog, felt like 1,000 chains binding them to this place. But there was one thing, one last piece of them that they had never been willing to relinquish. The part of them that made them human. The very thing that defined their will to live. It wasn't just about giving up a physical possession. It was about giving up a part of themselves, their very spirit, to satiate the hunger of the fog. In a moment of desperation, Alex realized what had to be done. They took a deep breath, steadying themselves, as if preparing for the greatest act of surrender they could ever imagine. The fog thickened around them, the whispering voices swirling into a frenzy, the red-eyed figure now completely still, watching, waiting. Alex stepped forward, their hand trembling as they reached into their chest, an odd, instinctual motion. They didn't know what they were doing at first, but it felt right. As if the act itself was the only way to sever the chains that bound them to this torment. Slowly, deliberately, Alex closed their eyes and, with a soft cry, offered, not a possession, but the very essence of themselves. It wasn't physical, it wasn't even rational. It was a feeling, a deep-rooted part of their soul, a piece of their self that they were finally ready to let go of. It was their fear, their guilt, their self-doubt. It was the constant weight they had carried, the darkness that had followed them, the part of them that held them back from moving forward. A piece of themselves that they had clung to for so long because it was all they had ever known. The moment Alex let go of that part of themselves, the fog seemed to inhale. The whispering voices grew louder, chaotic, then, suddenly, they ceased. The red-eyed figure stepped back, its presence retreating, its form shrinking into the mist. Alex's chest felt lighter. The suffocating pressure loosened, just a little. They had done it. They had sacrificed what the fog demanded, what it craved. And in that moment, the weight of the spirits that had surrounded them seemed to fade. The road stretched out in front of them, no longer looping, no longer endless. The fog had parted. The oppressive mist seemed to lift, the whispers silenced as if by some unseen hand. Alex stumbled backward, their hearts still pounding in their chest. They were free. The air felt clearer, the road ahead, finally, leading somewhere real. The red-eyed figure no longer stood before them. The fog had retreated into the distance, leaving only the faintest traces of mist curling in the air. It was over. They had escaped. But something had changed. Something deep within Alex had shifted. A hole, an emptiness, remained where that piece of their soul had once been. The fog might be gone, but the feeling of loss was still with them. As Alex drove away, the road stretching out before them, they couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the fog was still there, somewhere, always waiting. They had escaped, but at what cost? The red-eyed figure's warning echoed in their mind, escape requires a sacrifice. And now, Alex understood what that truly meant. The price of survival wasn't just a memory or a possession. It was a piece of their very soul. And it would haunt them forever. The fog that had once engulfed everything, the car, the road, the very air around Alex, began to recede, as if something had commanded it to dissipate. The oppressive weight lifted from the atmosphere, and the world slowly reappeared from the haze. The road stretched ahead, clear for the first time in what felt like forever, as though the fog had never existed. The headlights that illuminated the asphalt, no longer swallowed by the mist, revealing a dark, quiet stretch of North Carolina countryside. But something was different. Alex's hands still gripped the wheel, but they weren't consciously driving anymore. The car seemed to move of its own accord, gliding smoothly along the winding road with an ease that was unnatural. It felt almost as though the vehicle had been released from its previous struggle, freed from the weight of the fog's presence. The engine hummed, steady and sure, as if guided by some unseen force, and for a moment, Alex allowed themselves to relax. The GPS screen, which had been glitching, flickering with incoherent coordinates, was now completely still. It displayed a simple, straightforward path, no detours, no cryptic warnings. Just a straight line. Turn left in 5 miles. The voice of the navigation system sounded normal again, detached and unremarkable. Alex's breath caught in their throat. They were free. The endless loop of fog, the spirits, the figure, it was all gone. It was like waking from a nightmare, only to find themselves in an unfamiliar reality. But as they drove, something gnawed at the back of Alex's mind, a quiet, persistent unease that they couldn't shake. The road ahead was clear, yes, but something in the air had shifted. The sky above was darker than it should be, not quite night, but not quite dawn either, a strange, in between time that made the surroundings feel foreign, like they had crossed over into another world. The car moved forward with purpose, as if the road itself had opened up to welcome them. The trees along the roadside seemed to part, giving way to the path ahead. It almost felt like the world was clearing a way for Alex, one that hadn't existed before. They glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the fog creeping up behind them, to feel the presence of the spirits again. But nothing. The road was clear. Only the faintest traces of mist lingered in the distance, a memory of the terror that had been. A sense of tranquility washed over Alex. They were almost home. The suffocating fog had vanished, and the spirits that had tormented them for so long seemed to have disappeared. Their heart began to slow as they focused on the road, each mile bringing them closer to safety. But even as they drove forward, Alex couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of loss. The road ahead was clear, but they were not the same person who had entered the fog. The piece of themselves that they had sacrificed, the piece they could never get back, was a quiet, painful void now, something that lingered in the deepest part of their being. And no matter how much they told themselves that it was over, that they had escaped, they knew deep down that the cost would haunt them forever. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper stirred in the air. Alex glanced nervously at the rearview mirror again, but nothing was there. The road stretched out behind them, empty and still. Yet, that whisper remained, like an echo in the back of their mind. You could never truly escape. The voice was faint, barely audible over the hum of the car, but Alex knew it wasn't their own thoughts. It was something else. Something lingering. With a quick breath, Alex shook their head, trying to push the thought away. They had made it. The fog was gone. The spirits were gone. The road was clear, and they were going home. But in the pit of their stomach, the gnawing sense of unease wouldn't fade. They pressed the accelerator just a little harder, hoping that speed would banish the growing sense of dread. The car surged forward, as if in response, the engine purring with energy, the road ahead lighting up with each passing mile. The world outside was quiet, almost too quiet, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. But the fog, though gone from the physical world, had left a lingering mark. The figure's red eyes, the whispers, the unnatural feeling of being watched, all of it stayed with Alex, deep inside. The escape was only the beginning. And as the miles passed, Alex realized the truth. The road ahead might have seemed clearer, but they were still being driven down a path from which there was no turning back. As the miles stretched out ahead of them, Alex felt a deep, almost physical sense of relief. The tension in their shoulders began to ease, the tightness in their chest loosening. The road was clear, the fog had lifted, and the oppressive weight of the spirits that had haunted them for so long seemed to have vanished. For the first time in what felt like ages, Alex could breathe without the constant pressure of the unknown bearing down on them. The familiar hum of the engine was comforting, a sound that felt like safety, something solid and real in a world that had once seemed so fractured. And yet, even as relief washed over them, there was a heavy feeling in the pit of Alex's stomach. It wasn't the gnawing fear that had plagued them for hours. No, it was something else. Something more profound. The road was clear, the nightmare was over, but it had come at a cost. The piece of themselves that Alex had let go of in the fog, the part of their soul they had sacrificed to escape, was a void that would never be filled. It felt like the air around them was thinner, as if something essential had been stripped away, leaving behind an emptiness they couldn't ignore. It was as if their very essence had been altered, leaving them with a hollow, aching feeling that no amount of fresh air or empty road could cure. Alex's eyes scanned the darkness outside the car, the familiar trees and fields now distant in the soft glow of the headlights. It all seemed so normal, so safe. But the world felt off. The silence was too quiet. The night too still. It was as if something had been shifted, some cosmic balance irreversibly disturbed. The GPS continued to guide them along the road, the screen now calm and steady. It told them where to turn, the next exit, the next mile marker, just like it always had. Everything seemed normal. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer fully connected to the world they had left behind. Their hands gripped the steering wheel, but they couldn't shake the sensation that they were on autopilot, driving not just through space, but through time itself. Is this it? Alex thought, a bitter taste rising in their mouth. Am I free? Or have I just traded one nightmare for another? The fog may have receded, but the cold truth lingered. They hadn't just sacrificed a possession. They had left a piece of themselves behind, something that could never be reclaimed. The weight of the loss settled in their chests like a stone, dragging them down. The car moved forward, but Alex didn't feel in control anymore. They had crossed a line, and they couldn't go back. The life they had known, the person they had been, was no longer within their reach. The spirits, the fog, the red-eyed figure, they were gone, but so was part of Alex's soul. That was the price of escape. It wasn't just a momentary surrender, it was something far deeper. It was a piece of who they were, who they had been, torn away. And the worst part? They weren't sure if they could ever be whole again. The road ahead seemed to go on forever, stretching into a dark, empty landscape. And as Alex drove, their mind wandered, searching for something, anything, that could fill the emptiness inside them. But there was nothing. No answer. No comfort. They glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see the fog creeping up behind them, the figure with red eyes appearing once more. But nothing. The road was clear. The air was calm. Yet the ache within Alex remained, growing with every mile. It wasn't just the loss of a physical possession. It was the loss of a part of themselves that they had never realized mattered so much. The void wasn't just an absence, it was a presence in its own right, haunting them with the question, what have I become? And as the headlights cut through the night, Alex realized that their escape had come at an irreparable cost. They might be free of the fog, but the darkness inside them would stay forever. As Alex continued to drive, the road stretched out in front of them, seemingly endless. The surroundings, once swallowed by the dense fog, slowly began to return to something familiar. The trees, the fields, the uneven road, all gradually regained their shape and definition, as if the night itself had lifted, leaving only the faint traces of what had been. The oppressive feeling that had clung to them for so long began to loosen. The world outside the car seemed less threatening, less alien. The fog was gone. The whispers had faded into nothingness. There was no sign of the red-eyed figure, no shadows lingering on the horizon. It was as if the horrors of the past few hours had simply been a bad dream, a nightmare that had faded with the light of dawn. But even though everything seemed to be returning to normal, a part of Alex couldn't shake the unease. The quiet was almost too still. The world around them was too calm, too ordinary. It felt as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something. Alex's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see the fog creeping up behind them, or perhaps the faint glow of red eyes in the distance. But there was nothing. The road was clear. The dark sky above was beginning to lighten at the edges, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. The headlights of the car cut through the night, revealing the road ahead. And then, in the distance, a faint glow appeared, a soft yellow light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. A gas station. It was the first sign of civilization Alex had seen in hours, and despite the strange, lingering feeling that had settled in their chest, a wave of relief washed over them. They hadn't realized how desperately they needed to see another person, hear another voice, or simply stand on solid ground. The isolation of the road had been suffocating, the never-ending stretch of empty highway feeling like an extension of the fog itself. As they pulled up to the gas station, the small building looked ordinary enough, an old, withered station with flickering lights and a solitary pump. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the cold morning air, its letters spelling out open in flickering blue and white. The parking lot was empty, save for a single truck parked near the front of the station. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that only an isolated roadside stop could offer. Alex parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the gas station through the windshield. The air outside was crisp and cool, and the first light of dawn was creeping across the sky, bathing the station in a soft, muted glow. Everything looked so ordinary, so normal. A stark contrast to the nightmare of the past hours. But as they stared out the window, Alex couldn't help but feel that strange, lingering sense of loss settle even deeper. They hadn't escaped unscathed. No matter how much they tried to convince themselves that everything was fine, the emptiness inside them remained, a quiet echo of the sacrifice they had made. Taking a deep breath, Alex opened the door and stepped out of the car. The cool air hit their face, sharp and refreshing, but it did little to clear the weight on their chest. They locked the car behind them and walked toward the entrance of the station, each step feeling like it took them farther from the horrors of the fog and closer to something they couldn't yet name. The door to the station creaked open as Alex stepped inside. The small interior smelled of stale coffee and motor oil, the floor lined with dusty shelves and an assortment of chips, snacks, and magazines. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man with a stubbled chin looked up from his newspaper, giving Alex a tired but welcoming smile. "Morning," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Rough night?" Alex nodded, not trusting their own voice. The encounter, the figure, the fog, all of it felt like something distant, a bad memory they couldn't fully grasp. The man didn't seem to notice the weight in Alex's silence as he gestured toward the coffee machine. "You look like you could use some coffee," the man offered, his smile softening. Alex hesitated, their hand resting on the counter, fingers curling around the cool surface. A flash of the red-eyed figure crossed their mind, followed by the whispers and the chilling weight of the fog. It was hard to explain, hard to put into words. How could they tell someone that they had just been trapped in a nightmare, chased by ghosts and haunted by something they couldn't fully understand? But the normalcy of the station, the man's calm presence, was a relief. A small comfort. Alex took a deep breath and nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Yeah, I think I could," they replied, their voice rough. The man poured a steaming cup of coffee, handing it over with a reassuring nod. Alex took the cup, the warmth seeping into their hands, grounding them in the present moment. For a fleeting second, as they sipped the bitter brew, they allowed themselves to believe that the worst was over, that they had escaped the fog and the horrors that had nearly consumed them. But the nagging sensation never fully left, like the distant echo of the whispers that still clung to the edges of their mind. As they stepped back outside and looked at the road ahead, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something irreversible. The fog may have cleared, but the mark it left on their soul would remain, forever hidden beneath the surface. And no matter how far they drove, no matter how far they ran, the road ahead would always lead them somewhere they couldn't escape. Alex stood at the counter, the warm cup of coffee now cooling in their hands, trying to gather their thoughts. The quiet hum of the gas station filled the air, mingling with the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. The man behind the counter continued to gaze at Alex, his eyes kind, but there was something in his expression, a quiet curiosity, perhaps even a trace of concern, that suggested he had noticed something off about Alex. The weight of the experience still clung to them, and they opened their mouth, as if to speak, to explain the horror they had just endured. The encounter with the fog, the red-eyed figure, the whispers that had filled the air. The relentless pursuit, the sensation of being trapped in an endless loop. But as the words hovered on the edge of their tongue, Alex froze. The fog had seemed so real, so terrifying, and yet, now that they were standing in the soft, ordinary light of the gas station, the details of it felt blurry, distant, like a fading dream they couldn't fully grasp. They had been so sure of the terror, the fear, but now, recalling the exact details felt strangely impossible. "Are you all right?" the attendant asked, his voice gentle, but probing. He looked at Alex with a mix of concern and confusion. "You seem a little shaken up." Alex took a deep breath, trying to focus. I should tell him what happened, they thought. He might understand, or at least he'll listen. But the words wouldn't come. The road, where had it been? North Carolina? But where exactly? The fog, it was thick, yes, and oppressive, but now it felt like a memory from someone else's life. The details kept slipping through their fingers, like sand in a storm. Alex tried to form a coherent sentence, but each attempt only left them feeling more fragmented, more disconnected. I don't remember, Alex said quietly, shaking their head. I can't remember where it happened. The road, where exactly was it? The attendant paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he regarded Alex more closely. What road? You mean the one you were on before? Alex nodded, but the certainty they had once felt about the journey, the twists and turns through the fog, was gone. Now, everything felt vague and nebulous. They couldn't recall the names of the streets, the landmarks, or even the general direction they had been heading in. It was as if the road had dissolved into thin air, vanishing from their memory entirely. It was a strange, terrifying sensation, like a part of their past had been erased. I was just driving through some back roads. It was foggy. Thick fog. And there was something chasing me, Alex tried to explain, but even as the words left their lips, they felt hollow, disconnected from the truth of what had happened. The attendant nodded slowly, clearly unsure how to respond. Back roads, huh? You get a lot of those around here. The fog's something else sometimes, especially out this way. But, are you sure you weren't just tired? Maybe hallucinating a little? Alex's heart sank. The doubt in the attendant's voice stung, but even worse was the sinking realization that they couldn't deny it. The way the fog had clung to the car, the way the red-eyed figure had loomed in the distance, it all felt so real. And yet, now, in the harsh light of the gas station, they couldn't bring themselves to fully believe it. I don't know, Alex admitted, their voice barely above a whisper. I was sure of it, but now I don't know. The attendant gave a small, almost sympathetic shrug. Happens to the best of us, especially on long drives. You start to lose track of time, of where you're going. The mind plays tricks, especially on empty roads. You're probably just tired, that's all. Alex wanted to protest, to shout that it wasn't a trick of the mind, that it was real, that it had to be real. But the more they tried to recall the details, the more elusive they became. They couldn't even remember the name of the road, the town they had passed through. It felt like an ungraspable dream, slipping away faster the harder they tried to hold on to it. And yet, somewhere deep inside, they knew something had happened. It hadn't been a simple hallucination. The fog, the figure, the voices, they had felt too real, too tangible. But if they couldn't even remember where it had happened, if they couldn't explain it to anyone, could they even trust themselves? The attendant, sensing the tension building in Alex, gave a soft sigh. "Hey, I'm not saying you didn't see something strange. But you're here now, safe and sound, right? Maybe just take it easy. A hot meal, a break, and then head home. Things will look clearer in the morning. Everything seems worse when you're alone and on the road for too long." Alex nodded absently, still clutching the coffee cup. They didn't know if the attendant's words helped or if they only made the situation worse. The question gnawed at them, the gnawing uncertainty. What had really happened? Was it a bad dream, a trick of the mind? Or was there something far worse at play? The attendant turned back to his counter, resuming his task of wiping down a shelf, leaving Alex to their thoughts. Alex felt a hollow ache deep within them, as if part of their life had just slipped into some place they couldn't follow. They turned toward the door, feeling as if they were walking through a fog of their own, even though the outside world was clear. Every step felt like it was taking them farther away from the truth, farther away from the reality they had just barely escaped. The fog might have receded, but the question remained, what if it never really left? Alex started the car, the engine humming to life with an odd sense of finality. The gas station, the attendant, and the sense of the world slowly returning to normal were behind them now. The road ahead was clear, stretching out into the night, free from the oppressive fog that had swallowed them only hours ago. For a moment, Alex felt a fleeting sense of relief, as though the nightmare had finally been left behind. But as the tires rolled over the asphalt, there was a faint crackle from the radio. At first, Alex thought it was just the usual static, perhaps from passing through a weak signal area. But then it came again, louder this time, the static sharpening into something clearer, more distinct. Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The voices, faint and distant, sounded wrong. Distorted. Unnaturally muffled. Like they were coming from far away, or perhaps somewhere else. "You'll be back." The words were a whisper, barely audible, but they sent a chill racing down Alex's spine. The voice was familiar, but not in any comforting way. It was one of those same haunting whispers they had heard back in the fog, murmuring just beyond their reach, taunting them, following them, as if waiting for them to return. The hair on the back of Alex's neck stood on end. They tried to turn the radio dial, desperate to change the station, but the static only grew louder, more insistent. The voices continued, disjointed and jarring. "You'll be back. You'll never leave. You're ours." Alex slammed the volume knob down, plunging the car into a tense silence. But the words had already sunk deep into their mind, echoing through their thoughts, impossible to shake. Shaking, Alex glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the looming, unnatural fog. And for a moment, they almost convinced themselves that they had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, the radio playing on their nerves after everything they had just been through. But then they saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible outline, mist, just barely visible, clung to the edge of the road in the mirror. It was distant, nearly invisible against the dark backdrop of the night, but it was unmistakable. The fog, creeping back into existence, just out of sight. Alex's heart skipped a beat, and they tore their gaze from the mirror, eyes darting back to the road ahead. They pressed the gas pedal harder, the car picking up speed as the night stretched before them, but the unease lingered. Was it real? Was the fog still out there, just waiting for them to return? Or was it the lingering effects of the terror they'd experienced, making them see things that weren't there? The radio crackled again, faint and far away, but its words were unmistakable. "You'll be back." A wave of dread washed over Alex as the road stretched on, empty and endless. The haunting realization settled in, a cold, quiet truth. The fog might have receded for now, but somehow it would always find its way back. Thank you for making our stories part of your relaxation time. We hope they brought you a sense of peace and transported you to a world of fantasy and mystery. If you enjoyed the stories, feel free to leave us a review. Your feedback inspires us and helps us make the content even better. Now, unwind to the calming sounds of rain and thunderstorms, which will continue to set a tranquil mood. Let these sounds carry you gently into the realm of dreams. Don't forget to like our page if you haven't yet. Wishing you a restful night's sleep. Relax, rest well, and good night.